for the budget estimates. The Senate has referred to the committee the particulars of proposed expenditure for the 2022-23 for portfolios of Home Affairs and the Attorney-General and other related documents. These are budget estimates proceedings, and the outcomes to be heard during today's estimates are from the Attorney-General's portfolio. The committee has set Friday the 16th of December 2022 as the date by which answers to questions on notice are to be returned. The committee has also decided that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by 5 p.m. Friday the 18th of November 2022. Under Standing Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session. This includes answers to questions on notice. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as contempt. It is also contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. Officers and senators are familiar with the rules of the Senate governing estimates hearings. If you need assistance, the Secretariat has copies of the rules. The Senate, by resolution in 1999, endorsed the following test of relevance of questions at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operations or financial positions of the departments and agencies which are seeking funds in the estimates are relevant questions for the purposes of estimates hearings. I remind officers that the Senate has resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has a discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has also resolved that an officer of the Department of the Commonwealth shall not give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of an officer to superior officers or to a minister. The resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I particularly draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate of the 13th of May 2009, specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication to the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure of the information or the document. Mobile phones should be switched off or turned to silent mode. Senators, departments and agencies have been provided with advice on the arrangements in place to ensure that Budget Estimates 2022-23 hearings are conducted in a safe environment. This guidance is also available for the Secretariat. The committee appreciates the cooperation of all attendees in adhering to these arrangements. In order to comply with COVID safety requirements, senators and the Secretariat may use electronic devices to communicate with one another during the hearing. We ask witnesses forbearance to do so and apologise in advance for any discourtesy. Officers called upon for the first time to answer a question should state their full name and position for the Hansard record, and witnesses should speak clearly into the microphones. I welcome Senator the Honourable Anthony Chisholm, representing the Attorney-General. Minister, would you like to make an opening statement?
No, thanks, Chair.
I call officers from the Australian Federal Police. Commissioner, would you like to make an opening statement before we go to questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Rhys Kershaw, Australian Federal Police Commissioner. Good morning, Chair and committee members. Today I'll table a more comprehensive statement, but we'll run through a shorter statement to save time. Crime originating offshore, like illicit drug production, child exploitation, extremism and cybercrime, can affect the quality of life of Australians at home. The AFP's mission is to protect Australians and our way of life, and that's why the AFP has 199 members in 33 countries, working closely with law enforcement agencies across the globe. Put simply, investing in the AFP offshore is investing in the safety of Australians at home. In the past financial year, the AFP's International Command, with overseas law enforcement partners, seized about 20 tonnes of illicit drugs, some destined for Australia and our region. Apart from helping to stem the tide of illicit drugs in our community, this disruption is critical because the offshore illegal drug trade can also bankroll child exploitation, sexual servitude and human trafficking. We are also working with our partners to disrupt offshore cyber criminals who are targeting Australians. The AFP has 6 members in the Netherlands, Serbia, South Africa and the UK and the US who are focused on combating cybercrime. The Optus data breach. The AFP, with the assistance of key partners, are investigating a number of cyber breaches. Today, I have a message to business. Please alert authorities immediately when a data breach is suspected. Cyber-enabled crime includes other criminality like child exploitation. The Philippine Internet Crimes Against Children Centre, which the AFP and partners established in 2019, has removed 533 children from harm and charged 118 suspects. Some charges were laid against offenders in Australia who, from their lounge rooms, directed online child sexual abuse. For as little as $15, perpetrators around the world are communicating online with other perpetrators and paying them to assault children. If circumstances allow it, the AFP will use the Proceeds of Crime Act to launch civil proceedings against offenders who use their property as instruments of crime to commit serious offences, including in our region. In the Pacific, and that brings me to the crucial work we are doing in our region, where the AFP has 123 members in 9 Pacific countries. These relationships have enabled me to hold several productive meetings with my Pacific counterparts in recent months, including with the Chiefs of Police in Fiji and with the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force Commissioner Mostyn Mangal, the Royal Solomon Islands Minister for Police, National Security and Correctional Services, the Honourable Anthony Vecchi, and Karen Gulakale, who is the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Police, National Security and Correctional Services for the Solomon Islands. Our established relationships offshore have also assisted with the repatriation of 4 women and 13 children from detention camps in northeastern Syria, and I have confidence in the well-established framework that enables the AFP to respond and manage to extremist threats in Australia, including our community liaison teams which work with community leaders to support these returned individuals. Last month I attended the 90th Interpol General Assembly in New Delhi, where the AFP held 25 bilateral meetings to further strengthen ties with our policing partners. Today I can reveal that Interpol is considering creating a new Interpol Silver Notice to enhance criminal asset tracking and better support the exchange of intelligence about financial crime. Finally, the Ombudsman's most recent report relevant to the AFP was tabled in September and related to records in the 2019-20 financial year. I'm confident the findings in this report have been addressed, including through a new fully digitised request process rolled out in early 2022. Thank you, and now happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. And have we received a copy of that tabled statement?
I believe it has been
Someone's
tabled,
going to
or
give
it
us
is
that.
being tabled,
Thank you
Chair.
so much. Senator Scar, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. Good to see you and your team with us today. Thank you very much. I'd like to start my questions in relation to the comments you made about the repatriation of the 4 women and 13 children who were family members associated with ISIS fighters. You talked about the AFP's role in terms of the repatriation of those people in your opening statement. Was the AFP consulted before the government made the decision to repatriate, as opposed to being involved in the operation to repatriate? So were you consulted with prior to the government making a decision to repatriate wives and children of ISIS fighters from Syria?
We provided advice to the government.
When did you provide that advice?
Exactly when? I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
Could you take that on notice? And how soon after you provided the advice did you become aware of the decision that the government made to actually repatriate those individuals?
Yeah, I'd have to take that on advice as well, because there are a number of discussions and inputs into that advice.
Okay, so it wasn't just simply the provision of a set piece of advice. It was an iterative process where there was toing and froing and discussion of the advice. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just want to be cautious around discussing cabinet processes and other things. I don't think I'm able to discuss that in this forum, but happy to take that on notice and come back to you.
Okay, so what I'm particularly interested in is the stage of the decision making when the AFP was consulted, and take on notice, if you can, whether or not you can provide any of the advice that was provided and the views of the AFP with respect to the repatriation of that cohort. Was your advice sought with respect to the repatriation of any additional cohorts? So there's been, at this point in time, we have the cohort of 17. Has the AFP's advice been sought with respect to any additional cohorts or repatriation of any additional individuals?
What I can say is that a number of these matters are under current investigation through, in particular, 2 joint counter-terrorism teams, which are one's based in New South Wales and one's based in Victoria. And as you're aware, they're a multi-agency construct, those teams, and some of those are active investigations. I wouldn't want to go into detail about those investigations, given the fact that they are active, about any outcomes. And I've said this before on record, previously publicly, some of these may or may not be charged. So we have active investigations right now on these matters.
So just to be clear, there's active investigations in relation to any or all of the 17 individuals who've been repatriated, is that correct?
That's correct.
So active investigations as to whether or not they've breached Australian laws, correct?
Correct.
Active consideration of whether or not those individuals be subject to control orders?
Correct.
And have any of that cohort voluntarily agreed to be subject to a control order?
I wouldn't go into specifics, but I would say we have had, and I might ask the deputy to help me out here or correct me, they've been very cooperative with law enforcement.
All 17 of them?
No, the current group that are back now.
Which is the 17, the 4 women and 13 children?
17, yes, sorry, I meant the 4 women.
Okay. If any of those individuals do voluntarily agree to submit to a control order, what would be the process for that control order to be placed in the event that someone voluntarily submits?
I'll ask my friend here to help me out.
Thank you.
Our friend, not
Our
your friend, our friend.
Thank you, Commissioner. Deputy Commissioner Investigations Ian McCartney. I think obviously consent's one thing, but I think in terms of a control order, it's under a piece of legislation, and we need to hit legal thresholds in relation to apply for and obtain a control order. Consent, it's not going to get us across the line.
It's not sufficient.
It's not sufficient. We need to prove before the court in terms of the level of threat, perceived threat and future threat to obtain a control order, Senator. But again, as the Commissioner's noted, there's been active consultation and active review in terms of pieces of legislation we can apply to this cohort.
So that assessment of level of threat of individuals within that 17-person cohort is currently underway. Is that correct?
That's a piece of work that's undertaken by ASIO, Senator, in terms of the threat piece or the risk those people pose to this country.
And is ASIO liaising with the AFP in that respect? Do you work together
daily?
in that respect?
I think, Senator, as the Commissioner said, and as part of the joint counter-terrorism arrangements, it's a very mature, robust, cooperative arrangement. We speak to ASIO every day in relation to these matters.
So the decision, the assessment of whether or not any of those 17 individuals should be made subject to a control order is under active consideration?
Correct.
So that necessarily means that the consideration of whether or not any of those 17 individuals should be subject to a control order was not determined prior to those individuals coming into this country. Is that correct?
No, it was. It was. And we didn't assess that we had sufficient grounds to obtain a control order in relation to those individuals. So there was an assessment done at the time, but that's a point-in-time assessment, Senator. It's a continuous process in terms of updating the threat assessment.
Well, I understand, but the only thing that's changed in terms of that assessment is they've actually crossed the border and come into the country, isn't it?
Correct.
So you undertook an assessment before they came into the country and formed the view you had insufficient evidence to impose control orders upon those individuals. That's correct. But they've come into the country and you've now re-enlivened the process of whether or not they should be subject to control orders once they've crossed the border. Is that correct?
Not so much re-enliven. We've continued to monitor, we've continued to assess those individuals both offshore and obviously onshore, working very closely with our colleagues from ASIO.
But that necessarily means that you still, from the AFP's perspective, these were still matters of such seriousness that it warranted this continuing investigation that you're currently undertaking with respect to whether or not these individuals should be subject to control orders. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've continued to monitor and assess for a number of years in terms of individuals offshore, and we'll continue to monitor and assess those individuals that return to Australia. And if the legislation is in place, if we can apply that legislation, if we can, I suppose, achieve the thresholds that relate to those pieces of legislation, we'll apply that legislation, Senator.
Let me put it another way. The threat is such, or the risk is such, that you've made a determination that these individuals should be the subject of continuing investigation and consideration as to whether or not any or all of them should be subject to control orders. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But sorry, can I just ask a follow-up? You do continuous risk assessments?
We do.
Yeah.
But a decision was not made that you would cease to consider whether or not these individuals would be subject to a control order. So presumably when you consider control orders, there'd be a category of cases where you consider whether or not someone should be subject to a control order. You complete your investigation and then you cease any consideration with respect to a control order with respect to a particular individual. Do you understand the point I'm making?
Yeah, I understand
Deputy
the point
Commissioner?
you're making, but I think that the point to be made, we assessed in terms of the application of a control order when they were offshore. We continue to assess. They don't hit the threshold for control order based on the level of risk and level of threat, Senator.
Because those individuals still warrant that level of active consideration by the AFP, is that correct?
They warrant active consideration, but they don't hit the legal thresholds for a control order.
So they're still the subject of that active consideration?
Correct.
Commissioner, in the March estimates, I recollect you providing some evidence, and I'll just speak in general terms, with respect to the cost associated with imposition of control orders on particular individuals. And I think you gave an example of one case, and from recollection you didn't mention the name of the individual, but the cost I found quite astonishing, was close to 300 police, I think, over a period of 2 weeks at a cost of $3.8 million over 1 year. And I note that in your most recent annual report, Operation Rosendale talks about the actions of the AFP in terms of monitoring terrorist offenders, and there's a few examples of steps that have been taken with respect to people who have been subject to control orders, breached those control orders and been subject to criminal prosecution. What is the cost in terms of monitoring individuals who are subject to control orders, and the cost of assessing, you're obviously in the process of assessing whether or not certain individuals should be subject to control orders. What is the cost of that exercise? It seems a hugely expensive undertaking, and no doubt takes a lot of manpower.
Yeah, it's in particular our high-risk terrorist offender cohort, which is what I was referencing to, I think 31st of March 2022, and you're quite right, I actually stated that took over 300 police over a period of 2 weeks at a total cost for 1 year of $3.8 million. I mean, we don't put a price on protecting our community and looking after our community from any kind of harm. And even last night, we made an arrest in relation to that operation you're referring to, of that individual. And the media release has gone out this morning, I think. And it goes to show you that our controlled order, or basically this individual breached an interim supervision order, but again, that was done jointly with New South Wales Police and through the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team. They are resource intensive. I can't give you an exact figure on every time that we monitor these individuals and or take action, because they're done in a threat assessment, a risk assessment, a whole range of things, tools that we use to then work out what resources we need to monitor a particular individual. And there's different means, as you're aware, electronic, other things that we can do to reduce the actual human resource, but they are resource intensive.
So when you were providing input and advice with respect to the repatriation of this cohort of 17 individuals and advice with respect to future repatriations, did that include advice or guidance or an estimate with respect to the costs involved in terms of supervising individuals when they came back to Australia, the cost of engaging in the ongoing security assessment, which the Deputy Commissioner has referred to and which I'm sure has been carried out diligently? Did you provide an assessment or insight into the costs and what it practically means for your service in terms of engaging in this task?
I mean, I didn't myself. I'm not too sure if the Deputy did, but there was an implied, I guess, knowledge that everyone has that they are resource intensive, but each case is different depending on, again, those assessments, our intelligence, and also whether or not we're collecting evidence or not. So, I would say that, I've been on record before that they are resource intensive, but again, it depends on the individual, and then I leave it up to police officers have discretion, and then they'll ask for resources, and if we get to the point where it's becoming quite resource intensive, then that's normally when it would be elevated up through our chains to the Deputy or myself around having to allocate additional resources outside the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team remit. At the moment, I've not had that request in relation to the women and children, but again, I'd ask our friend if that's any different.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that there have been ongoing discussions. Our position is that in terms of the cohort that has returned, we can manage them within existing AFP resources in terms of the workload at present.
Okay. At the committee estimates on Friday, 28 October, I asked the Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs questions in relation to the reports that had appeared in the Australian newspaper in the lead up to the repatriation of the cohort of 17, and the reports in the Australian were nearly in the nature of operational updates. They were that granular in terms of detail. The Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs advised that a reference had been made to the Australian Federal Police by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to investigate the leaking of sensitive information to the Australian. Is that correct? And if so, who made that reference, and is the investigation currently underway?
We're still going. Having learnt a lot about unauthorised disclosures, we have a process now where we're required, and this is a process designed with the DPP and others, and our legal team, that we require a harm statement. We have had a referral for that matter, but the next part of our process is a harm statement, which we're going through now in regards to obviously national security and the level of harm that that article has incurred. So we're going through that process now.
So the referral to the AFP was from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet?
Yes, Senator. There'd been ongoing discussions with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet on the 27th of October. We received a report of crime from the department, which is our normal process in terms of receiving these types of referrals.
Okay.
And
Is
as the Commissioner's noted, there's ongoing discussions in relation to the department in terms of assessing the harm aspect of
Is
this.
it, and I'm not sure what your usual protocols are, so I don't want to take you into an area you don't want to go, but who actually, is it possible to table or to provide us on notice and maybe consider it on notice, that referral, that report?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Take it on
I think
notice.
I'd have to say, Senator, it's an
Senator
ongoing
Scarr, this will be your
investigation.
last question.
Okay, all right. My last question now. You referred to community liaison teams, and I note in your annual report there's impressive reporting of the activity. I was at a function over the weekend where members of the Syrian community conveyed to me that there's a lot of dismay, anger, concern within the Syrian community, especially those members of the Syrian community who've come here under humanitarian visas, etc., and who might have had family and friends who were murdered by members of ISIS. With respect to this operation, to what extent are your community liaison teams actually liaising with some of those communities who've been through great trauma at the hands of ISIS and are understandably concerned about this recent development?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think those teams do some great work, and they engage with not just one component of the community, all different components of the community, and including the group that you referred to. Yes, there have been discussions, there has been consultation with that group. They've noted their concerns. But I suppose from our perspective, we've noted the work that we're doing in this space, as the Commissioner's noted and I've noted, in terms of the work that the AFP can do in this space.
Okay,
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Senator O'Neill, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Chair. And if I could just confirm that the ongoing surveillance that you do of the returned, the 4 women that's returned, that's your standard practice. You will continue surveillance just as a matter of course.
Well, Senator, I don't think we're going to go into the details of how we're going to bite those investigations.
But they're certainly not subject to any of the control orders about which Senator Scarr was asking.
No, they're not.
Thank you. Commissioner Kershaw, are you aware of recent reports in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald regarding migration fraud?
Oh, yes, I am.
Commissioner Kershaw, could you update us as to whether the AFP are aware of any current investigations into these matters?
I'm just going to have my other acting deputy assist me on that answer, but we are aware of, we work with Australian Border Force on these matters, and where it's a federal offence and in our remit, then we will investigate. I can say that we are assessing those matters with Border Force, and I think the acting deputy might be able to provide an answer to that.
Because I know Australians are very concerned about this.
Yeah.
You know, these things don't happen overnight, and we've got a long history here of what's been going on. So I'll be most interested to hear what's been happening. Sorry, Ms Gale, is it? Thank you.
Yes, it's, thank you, Senator. It's Lisa Gale. I'm currently Acting Deputy Commissioner Operations.
Thank you.
Senator, what I can say is, as the Commissioner indicated, the Australian Federal Police works very closely with our Commonwealth partners in relation to all things relating to human trafficking, slavery and associated offences. What I can say is that the Australian Federal Police are the lead agency in relation to offences against the Commonwealth Criminal Code, particularly sections 270 and 271. We also are responsible for the administering of a Look a Little Deeper prevention, awareness raising and education program that we deliver to a number of Commonwealth and state agencies across a number of sectors to educate those agencies in relation to indicators to look for where there may be offences against the broad spectrum of offences within the Criminal Code. We also have responsibility for working with our state and territory law enforcement partners in relation to educating them in relation to trafficking, slavery and associated offences that often relate in with migration offences. So we have responsibility for that as well. In addition to that, we are also a responsible agency to refer victims of these offences to the Support for Trafficking Persons program.
So, Ms Gale, that's a mighty body of work that the AFP are undertaking, both, proactive educational as well as responding to report and your own inquiry. So can I go again to my question to Commissioner Kershaw? Is the AFP aware of any current investigations into these matters? Are you investigating the matters that have been reported in the Age of Sydney Morning Herald in recent days regarding migration fraud?
Senator, what I would say is that the Australian Border Force are the lead agency in relation to offences against the Migration Act. Certainly from the AFP's perspective, at the moment, I'm not aware of any offences that we're investigating in relation to that.
So you are not investigating, Australian Border Force is investigating, is that correct?
No, I didn't say that, Senator. I
just want to be clear because,
Yes.
People have a lot of confidence in the AFP and they're very unhappy about what they've been reading about in recent days. We want to know exactly what intersectionality is going on there. Ms Gale.
Senator, as I indicated to you, we work very closely in collaboration with our partner agencies, Australian Border Force particularly, in relation to these type of offences. The AFP is very much the lead agency in relation to offences against the criminal code that relate to trafficking and slavery offences. Australian Border Force are very much the lead in relation to Migration Act offences.
Commissioner Kershaw, did you want to add something there?
I'd just say, Senator, just going towards Acting Deputy's comments, we work very closely with Border Force, so whilst we may not be investigating, we're certainly supporting Border Force in their investigations, if that makes sense. So we're not sitting out of the tent, so to speak. We work together. We sit back because unless there are offences relating to our criminal code, they're matters for Border Force, but we do work very well together in these types of instances.
And is it fair to say you're working with them on this matter currently?
We are, but we're probably, again, not across into the investigation side. We'd be more in the intelligence area.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, are you also aware of the recent report on migration agent Mr Jack Tarr?
I've read that, yeah.
So the Age alleges that Mr Tarr's migration agency is linked to a dozen or so unmeritorious asylum seeker claims, including at least 15 made by convicted Vietnamese drug offenders. Do you agree that these allegations, if true, are very serious matters?
I mean, these are difficult matters in the sense that they're aired publicly and, we, as you know, we follow the evidence and that's why I think it's important that you understand our role, which you do, I think, Senator, versus ABF. And we take these matters seriously. So if we do get a referral from ABF, for example, or from a alleged victim, we will take action. They're quite complex, some of these issues, because what we've found, our experience is the reluctance of witnesses to come forward because of the complexity of linkages back to their home countries, the fear of retribution and a whole range of things. And as you know, we can't prosecute, or DPP would not probably prosecute without having a witness involved. So that's why we have to take our time and be very patient with these matters, but we are looking at that whole landscape right now and we continue to, and that's important to know that we're not, as I said, sitting outside the tent. We're in on these matters and we're going to assist our friends at ABF in any way we can.
Because visa fraud is the one bit that's captured the imagination recently, but to have behind that convicted drug offenders from another jurisdiction raises community alarm even higher. Could I just ask, how long has the Australian Federal Police been concerned about these particular sorts of crimes that have been reported in recent days?
Senator, can I say we remain in an enduring way always very concerned in relation to any crimes where there are victims, particularly where we know often there are vulnerable victims. As the Commissioner indicated, you're talking about a cohort of people who are very vulnerable to being exploited. So our investment and efforts in collaboration with state and territory law enforcement and our Commonwealth partners, we remain in an enduring way very concerned, hence why we invest significant effort into prevention, awareness and education of those organisations that would be coming across potential victims in the front line and may not know what the indicators are to look for. Hence why the role we play in helping those organisations identify victims is critical for us.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Did you want to add anything, Commissioner Kershaw?
No, I think that's correct, Tim.
Well, thank you, and I wish you the very best in resolving some of those matters that are of great concern to the community. And if I could just ask another few questions, Chair, on a different matter. We've just talked about the international context, and information sharing across jurisdictions is absolutely critical to successful Australian Federal Police convictions. I just note that in December 2021, Australia and the US signed the agreement between the Government of Australia and the Government of the United States of America on access to electronic data for the purpose of countering serious crime. That's been called by shorthand in this place the Australia-US Cloud Act Agreement. And I know that Senator Green and I have been on JSCOT having a look at that. Could you outline the benefits to Australia in signing that agreement?
I might have the deputy make a comment on that, but I was actually there when that was signed, so in the US with the US Attorney General, so it streamlines a lot of the issues we have had with takedown of accounts, identification of offenders, the exchange of intelligence, a whole range of options now available to us under the Cloud Act, and being able to you know, for us, we were having to go through the mutual assistance regime, which is fantastically run by the Attorney General's Department. But as we know, country to country sometimes can take quite a while. This has sped up that process and allowed us to be able to move at speed. And as you're aware, Senator, with the advent of the internet now and everything being connected, there's often instances where most of those social media houses that we're looking at gathering intelligence from or evidence are based in the US, and we were having great challenges with getting our investigations were hampered at times due to the fact that we'd have to wait in line, and the US you know have obviously agreed to this, and it's been a great thing for us operationally. But I'll let the deputy maybe add something to that.
I don't think I could describe it any better, Senator. I think will have real practical benefit for the AFP, as the Commissioner has noted. Every crime that we investigate in the AFP has an online aspect, a focus on social media. So again, obtaining evidence in relation to social media accounts where you have to go to the US, sometimes it takes up to a year and a half.
A year?
Yeah, under mutual assistance. So we've been heavily...
Criminals can do a lot of damage in a year.
Oh yeah.
Well, they can. So again, I think we've been very supportive of this legislation right from the start. We've worked very closely with the Attorney General's Department, and we continue to support both the legislation and the implementation of the legislation.
So could you cover off for me what the challenges are that are presented by the current mutual legal assistance processes? Is that what you've been referring to there?
It's just a long process, Senator. I mean, I think we've been on the record many times. It's in the US, we've got a very good working relationship, but again, it's a long process in terms of obtaining evidence in a way that can be used in an Australian court under the Cloud Act that will provide us the ability to obtain that evidence in a much shorter period of time, so we can use it, as you've noted, both for the investigation, but importantly also for the prosecution of those offenders.
How many requests for data based in the US do you anticipate will occur each year?
I mean, how long's a piece of string, Senator? A lot. And again, this is why we've supported this piece of legislation right from
Are we
the
talking
start.
hundreds or thousands?
I think we're talking hundreds.
Okay.
And again, I go back to,
Senator, can I offer something that might contextualise it for you? Within the construct of online child exploitation, noting that our child protection triage unit receives its referrals from the US on a daily basis. This year alone, we've received in excess of 36,000 reports from the US relating to online child exploitation. So to gather information in relation to, for an evidentiary purposes, that highlights volume alone in terms of some of the requests and the benefits of this particular legislation.
So what period of time did you refer to there, Ms Gale?
Yeah, I can confirm, I believe it is this calendar year.
This will be your last question, Senator.
Thank you. Given the need for a very timely response to this, and I think noting that it was in 2018 that the US established the vehicle by which this could be established, I understand that the UK delivered this as in a relationship to the US in 2019. And also noting how significantly this can change what you're able to do, the benefit of law enforcement. What does the former government's delay in processing an agreement actually mean in terms of serious consequences to law enforcement?
Thanks, Senator, for your question. I don't think it's inappropriate for me to comment on the previous government and any decisions that they took.
You need legislation, though, to make this smooth transfer of information in the information age, and the vehicle to establish it was there, established in 2018 in the US. It was delivered in the UK in 2019, and here we are in 2022, and that critical access to information to prevent crime around the world and your interaction with it was not delivered in that period of time. Is that the fact of the matter, Mr Kershaw?
I think the fact of the matter for us is that we have it now and we're able to use it, and we're using it regularly, and that's a good thing.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Steele, John, you have the call.
Thanks, Chair. Just to kick us off, just to confirm, Commissioner Kershaw, the 17 individuals from Syria that have been repatriated to this point, all are Australian citizens, correct?
That's correct.
And did you mention there were four adults and the rest are children?
Correct.
What are the ages of the children? Are you able to provide that information?
I don't think that's appropriate, Senator. They're children. We would normally not comment on children and their ages.
Fair enough, fair enough. And how long have they been seeking formal repatriation?
How long have they been wanting to come back to Australia?
Yeah. Well, how long has this official process involving the AFP been undergoing? It's been a couple of years now, hasn't it?
It's been years. The exact date, we would have to take that on notice.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think I'll have to direct this question to the Minister representing the Attorney General. On the 7th of September, in the Senate, was passed an order for the production of documents, which was moved by myself, and requested documents be laid on the table in relation to, and I'll quote directly, any documents and communications held by the International Command of the Australian Federal Police relating to training, capacity building, the provision of equipment and technology and advisory activities provided by the AFP to the Myanmar Police, Intelligence or Ministry of Home Affairs personnel since the 1st of February. Do you recall that OPD, Minister, and you were the individual that gave the response on behalf of the government?
I recall that coming before the Senate. Yes, that's correct.
Yes. And your response was, and I'll quote you, the government will not be supporting this motion. I can advise the Senate that since the 1st of February 2021, the AFP International Command has not provided to the Myanmar Police Force any training, capacity building, advisory activities, or purchasing or gifting of any equipment or technology. Do you remember making that statement?
I can't recall the exact words I used, but I certainly recall making a statement about it.
And is it still your understanding that that statement's correct?
I have no reason to believe otherwise.
So just confirming that as of the 7th of September, the International Command had not participated in any of the previously mentioned activities with the Myanmar Police Force, as far as you understand it.
That was the advice I was given.
Is that your view also, Mr. Kershaw?
Senator, that's correct.
Thank you. You then went on to say, Senator, that the government had voted against the OPD, saying that, and I quote, documents requested by this motion may reveal operational sensitivities and undermine the AFP's international partnerships, compromising Australia's national security interests and the interests and protection of Australian citizens. Do you recall making that statement to the Senate?
I don't recall those exact words, Senator Steele-John.
But those are your exact words. I'm reading them to you from
I don't have it in front
Hansard.
of me. So.
Well, I can circulate them to you, but that's the Hansard. So there were documents requested by the Senate within this OPD that would have revealed information about operational sensitivities in relation to training, capacity building, advisory activities, or the purchasing or gifting of any equipment or technology to the Myanmar Police Force then?
I don't think that's a conclusion I would necessarily reach, but if there's further information to provide you, Senator Steele-John, I'm happy to provide that on the record.
Well, I can read those quotes back to you once again, but you previously said to the Senate that no such operations or engagements were taking place, and then subsequently said to the Senate that the disclosure of the documents requested, speaking to those operations or activities, would reveal operational sensitivities and undermine the AFP's international partnerships.
I think that's a broad reflection on the way governments of the day deal with sensitive national security issues and international arrangements. If there's further information I can provide on that matter, I'm happy to take it on notice and come back to you.
How can documents requested by that OPD reveal operational sensitivities if, as the AFP have just confirmed, no such operations were taking place?
As I said, Senator Steele-John, that's a broad reflection of the way governments of the day deal with sensitive national security issues. And I said, reiterate again, if there's further information provided, I'm happy to take it on notice and come back to you.
So your statement to the Senate was incorrect?
No, that's not what I said, Senator Steele-John.
So documents referenced and requested in the OPD would have revealed operational sensitivities?
No, that's not what I said. I've provided you an answer.
So just to confirm, Commissioner Kershaw, from the 1st of February, it's your understanding that no such activities between the Australian Federal Police International Command and the Myanmar Police Force were taking place.
Sorry, Senator, 1st of February, what year?
Sorry? From the 1st of February 2021.
Senator, no, but there has been ongoing engagement with the Myanmar Police on some...
Sorry?
There has been engagement with Myanmar Police, not in relation to training and capacity building.
Right.
But in relation to matters of interest to the AFP, particularly in relation to drug trafficking. I think in terms of context, 70% of the methamphetamine that ends up in the streets of Australia comes from Myanmar. So there has been some engagement. It's been restricted. It's been under the auspices of an agreement that we've entered into with DFAT and to ensure that whatever engagement is strictly restricted to those issues.
So you entered into an agreement with DFAT, did
Correct.
you? On what date?
I haven't got that in front of me, but I think it's relatively after the date of it would have been in 2021, Senator.
Post the 1st of February?
I'll take it on notice.
So just to confirm for the committee's understanding, the AFP has been engaging in operations with the Myanmar police force.
Correct. On a limited scale.
Post the 1st of February
Correct.
2021. Do you think, given...
Probably can I just clarify that? Just, Senator, so you're aware, operations can mean two different things to us. It can be intelligence only, or it can be investigation. And I think what the Deputy is indicating is we're on the intelligence side, which is for our national security, 70% methamphetamine hits the streets of Australia. So that intelligence is critical, and having that particular piece is what we've gone through with DFAT.
And so you're providing that in an advisory capacity to the Myanmar?
Correct. We don't operate operationally offshore, Senator. It's a liaison post where we exchange intelligence.
So you're exchanging intelligence and advising the Myanmar police force?
I think exchanging intelligence is the apt way to describe it, Senator.
Just to clarify, they're advisory activities?
No, I think, Senator, we don't advise another police force what to do. That's their sovereign country right. We accept that intelligence, and then we're able to send that back here and obviously work on targets back in Australia.
And then you provide advice as to how to proceed back to the Myanmar police?
No, because as you know, it's a death penalty country and there's other issues there. That's why, as the Deputy's saying, we have an agreement with DFAT on the engagement aspect.
Mm. Now, this is a police force which has been...
Senator, you've got a couple more questions in this block, just so you know. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. So, are you aware of the contents of the report produced by the Shell Centre for International Human Rights in coordination with Fortify Rights that was released in March of this year?
I've not read that report, Senator.
Mm. Well, if you had read that report, you'd know that there are many members of the Myanmar police force who are directly implicated in some of the most vile human rights abuses currently being perpetrated against the people of Myanmar, who are right now fighting back against a brutal military dictatorship. Is the Australian government or the AFP aware of any police officials that have been trained by Australia who may be responsible for the crimes listed in this report?
I'm not aware, Senator. I'd have to take that on notice.
And the AFP currently operates still an office in Yangon?
Correct.
That's co-located with the embassy?
Within the embassy, yes.
Within the embassy grounds. Have you done to this point any investigations to make sure that no training has occurred for people who are now known to have committed crimes against humanity?
We're continually assessing that. I know that we haven't delivered any training, certainly since I've become Commissioner, so we'd have to go back in time to have a look at that. So I'll take that on notice, Senator.
Is your last question, Senator?
No, that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Pocock, and then we'll come to Senator Patterson after that.
Thank you for the work you do, I guess particularly here in the ACT. Bit of a gear change. Keen to ask a few questions about the ACT to start. Sand, you've got an agreement with the ACT government where you provide policing, and was wondering if you have any data on how many vacancies there are for the AFP that are dedicated to the ACT?
Thanks, Senator, for your question. We actually, given my own background, having served in ACT Police, I'm pretty passionate about community policing, and of course the fact that the AFP has a wide remit now. We have uniforms overseas, we have the airports and a whole range of community policing responsibilities across the country and overseas. I took the, I guess, the initiative to do an external review of ACT policing, and I'm not too sure if you're aware of that, Senator. We have former Commissioner Mick Fuller leading that with Price Waterhouse Coopers. And part of that is to look at that arrangement, but also on the issue of ACT police forces, not just some of the vacancies they're experiencing, how we operate between national and ACT, and also the average, I guess, years of service of our officers on the street, on the road is what we call them. And we have had some concerns around that, and in particular, the reason why we're a little bit concerned is because ACT is now, in my view, become a growing metropolis. I think last year, and the Chief Police Officer might correct me, but he's not here, is, we had 16 homicides, which is, I think, sadly, probably a record year for ACT. We've had increased fatalities on the road. We've seen increase in domestic violence and sexual assault crimes. So I am committed to making sure we have enough numbers there, and we're also in confidential discussions with the ACT Police Minister, who he's passionate and supportive of ACT Police. So I'm sure we're confident in that we'll be able to raise the numbers there, and also make sure we're looking at the overall health and well-being of the force.
Thank you for that. Do you have a number for how many vacancies there are?
I think it changes I'll be honest, it changes on a weekly basis. So we'll probably come back to you. We did have that on our dashboard, but I don't have that in front of me. So we'll try and get back to you before this finishes today, but in the meantime, I'll take it on notice.
Thank you.
You might have it from our coup, is that right?
And
we might have that data here.
okay.
Apologies. I'm Charlotte Tressler, Chief Operating Officer. At the end of August, it was around 20 funded vacancies in ACT Police. We're going through another exercise now with PwC and Mick Fuller, as the Commissioner just outlined, to further understand their footprint and vacancies.
And Senator, can I just say this just to help you out? Key word there, funded. So what's happened in the AFP over time, some of our HR system shows vacancies, but they're actually not funded. So we've been cleaning those up over time because no funding has been attached to those vacancies. So you may have been quoted or something, other figures. Ours are funded, what's actually funded.
And it factors in having that gap. Does pay play a part in that?
I think in today's environment, we're looking at, if you look across the board, and I don't want to necessarily speak on behalf of other commissioners, but certainly they're seeing an increase in attrition. They're also seeing police move into higher paid jobs in other sectors. Certainly we're alive to that, and we know we have to be competitive. One of the things I'd like to see with ACT Police, and I've been talking to the Chief Police Officer, Neil Gagan, about this, is, recruiting from the region. I think we need to start focusing on that, because my own experience, having been NT Commissioner, was the more people you recruit from within your region, they tend to stay longer. If you recruit someone from Perth to work in Canberra, they'll probably spend most of their career trying to get back to Perth. That was my own experience. So I think that's something we're really alive to, and I think the ACT Chief Police Officers are also looking at how do we recruit from the region, and that'll help out the region as well. But also, given the fact that ACT is growing pretty quickly when it comes to, the growth in the population, but also in crime, sadly.
It's my understanding that the AFP is the lowest paid police force in the country. Is that correct?
I would say last time I had a look at this, I would probably dispute the lowest paid because you've got to take into account, I think, some of the other factors, which is our leave entitlements, the overall package on superannuation, a whole range of things. But I'll come back to you on that. I know
base
it's not. I know we're
salaries.
not the highest paid.
Yeah.
Senator.
Sorry, Commissioner,
Okay.
I can provide a little bit of, so just building on what the Commissioner has said, Senator, it is difficult to do a like-by-like comparison across different states and territories in the AFP because of the different allowances and things that are built in. Certainly, if you look at the base pay for AFP versus state and territories, we are certainly on the lower end in comparison to others.
And then slightly different topic. Would you support a blue card for AFP veterans similar to a white card for defence?
I think that's a challenging one because certainly I know I've been speaking to those particular groups who are pushing for that. I think that's probably an issue better answered by, I'm certainly not going to, I'm supportive of that initiative, but I think also we are doing a lot of work with our reserves program. That's an innovative program that we're up to close to 200 reservists who are now staying connected to the AFP. I think it's not just the blue card perhaps initiative that will help out our officers. We're finding that staying connected, a lot of our officers retire, not a lot, but quite a few retire, not overly happy, burnt out, exhausted. We're trying to maintain that connection, and recently even in Sydney, our Eastern Command, they held a first time in a long time, a whole range of former members, retired members come in, and we showed them what we're up to, and they get that pride back in the job and so on. We're not alone though, Senator, across the country. This is an issue for police forces, is mental health and well-being, and to do 20 or 30 years at today's pace, I can't see that happening without us actually changing the way we do things, because it's so intense now. And before, where police had to deal with a lot of things in the dark, a light's been shone on those areas, and I think the public are starting to become more alarmed at what we actually have to do day to day.
Thank you. I've noticed that you maintaining a presence outside the Russian embassy. Could you let us know when that started?
I think we've always maintained some form of presence around most of the embassies around Canberra. I'm aware
But specifically having a squad car.
Yeah, I'm
sitting
aware of
there.
a number of threats made, and also lots of packages. I think we've had lots of suspicious packages come there as well. So I could come back to you on the exact date when we've parked a car out there.
So it is a response to a specific threat?
Oh yeah, there's been a lot, as you could imagine.
It's a technical term.
Yes.
Would you be able to work out the cost to the taxpayer of having that 24/7 presence?
Yeah, we could, yes.
Outside
We
the
can work that out, yes.
Russian embassy? Good question. And is there precedent for providing this level of support to other embassies? Can you give a few examples of when this has happened in the past?
Well, we have to other countries. I don't want to single them out because I'll upset them. So we have done that for other countries.
So
as
there's
well.
been precedent for 24/7.
Yeah, we have
over months.
Yes, and we have a intelligence base that we have to use in our model of how we apply those resources, and it's a daily task for us.
Okay. Thanks very much. Just a time frame on when you'll be able to provide those answers.
Pretty quickly.
Is that something you've got? Okay.
Yeah, a couple of days, maybe. Maybe I'm putting too much pressure on the team, but
great. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Patterson, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for being here and for the work you and your officers do. I've got a number of topics to get through, which I'll try and do as efficiently as possible. Firstly, I want to turn to the report on the ABC on the 13th of October that there is a Chinese police station operating in Sydney. Firstly, are you familiar with those media reports?
No, but I did see something on my phone this morning, Senator, around one being in Canada, so that caught my attention.
Well, I mean, the AFP was approached for comment in this story, and unsurprisingly, perhaps, replied the AFP has no comment. Is anyone on your team familiar with these reports?
I think we'll be looking at them right now to see, because that certainly caught my attention, the Canadian example.
But hang on, this is an Australian example from a month ago. I'm sure there is someone here who's familiar with this report.
Senator, I am.
Okay,
Obviously,
great.
it goes back to ABC reporting on the 13th of October. We're aware of that reporting.
Okay. Did that report come as a surprise to you?
Listen, I think nothing really comes as a surprise for us in terms of the work that we do, but I think we've noted on numerous occasions in terms of our appearance before Senate estimates, the work that we do around countering foreign interference. It's a priority work for the AFP and obviously for our partner agencies.
So you were aware prior to these reports that there may be a Chinese police presence operating in Australia?
Listen, I'm not going to go into the specifics of the report. I'm aware of the reporting, and I think there is ongoing work in relation to the wider remit re-counter foreign interference centre.
I'll come to that in a minute, but I just want to stick with this specific issue first. Do you believe the reports are accurate?
I don't have any concerns.
You don't have any concerns? No. Is that because this was a declared presence that is a cooperative arrangement with the AFP, or you don't have any concerns because you don't believe it's active?
I don't believe it's active.
Okay. And what's the basis for your assessment that it's not active?
Well, it's just part of our ongoing work in relation to this space, Senator.
Yep. And is it your assessment that it was active at some point in the past?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the details, but I think I've read the report. We're satisfied and comforted at the position we hold at the minute.
I can understand why you might not be willing to go into details, but just for the public record, why can't you go into details?
Well, I think in terms of the work that we do in the counter foreign interference space, it doesn't stand still. It's ongoing, and again, I'm not prepared. I'm not been here to detail those issues.
There have previously been reports about programs such as Operation Fox Hunt, where Chinese police have attempted to effectively rendition people from overseas, including in Australia. What is your assessment about the current activity of Operation Fox Hunt or anything like it in Australia?
In relation to that reporting, in relation to renditions, that's data that goes back to 2014, 2015 and 16. We don't think it's a current issue for us.
I think also, Senator, to help you out, we have an MOU with MPS. If any others gets out of bounds, that MOU is rescinded, and then we stop doing our cooperation. So far, and I have just met with the MPS in India at Interpol. We know the rules, and so do they.
Thank you. I will come back to MOUs in a moment. Moving on more broadly to foreign interference, in ASIO's annual report last week, the Director General said that foreign interference and espionage have supplanted terrorism as their principal security concern, which is consistent with evidence that Mike Burgess has given to this committee and elsewhere, that we're on a trend for it to supplant it. Does the AFP share that assessment of ASIO?
We note that assessment from ASIO.
Yep. Commissioner, you've told this committee in the past, on the 14th of February specifically, foreign interference is an insidious and resource-intensive crime, and one that I expect will continue to grow and converge with other crime types in Australia. But the AFP, ASIO and other partners have the technical expertise and legislative framework to arrest and bring offenders to justice. How many people have been charged under the espionage and foreign interference legislation since it was introduced in 2018? One person's been charged.
Yes.
Are there any current active investigations under the EFI legislation?
There's ongoing investigations, Senator.
How many?
I'm not prepared to enter into how many's the numbers of those investigations.
And again, just for the record, why can't you go into the number?
Well, it's a sensitive area of work, and we're not going to flag how many investigations we've got ongoing.
Okay. What I'm trying to reconcile in my mind is statements from ASIO consistent with statements that you've made about the seriousness and the level of espionage and foreign interference activity. ASIO has previously said it's the highest levels in Australian history, even higher than at the height of the Cold War. with the fact that only one person has been charged in 4 years under the Act, how can both those things be true? Wouldn't we have expected to have seen more charges under the legislation if it was at those high levels?
As you're probably aware, they're incredibly complex. There's a difference between intelligence and evidence, and we have to collect evidence. Our I guess, targets are alive to a lot of, they have a lot of skills with how to subvert police investigations, the methods that we use, a whole range of things. So as far as degree of difficulty, they are the hardest, most difficult and most complex investigations given the country-to-country issues. How do you prove that someone is acting in that way? Very challenging given the fact that they were actually trained in how to avoid not only detection but how do you avoid committing a criminal offence. So they're very challenging investigations, but we're learning a lot about our environment in this area, and again they are resource intensive, but we do have a great working relationship. The task force with ASIO, in my view, is world class. It's just not easy to charge these people with criminal offending. What I think ASIO have done magnificently well is provide us that advice and intelligence, and then where we've been able to use evidence. I think it's a significant achievement having someone charged, and again that matters before the court. And
Indeed.
When that comes out, I think everyone will understand how complex these matters are and what we have to prove.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the complexity. Are there any legislative or barriers? Is there any deficiencies in your view in the Act that has made your task harder? Would there be any changes to the Act that would make it easier to bring charges?
I think it's very difficult because we would probably say that in that particular crime type, I don't know how you would make it easier without it then being challenged down the track, and it's probably a matter for my learned friend on my right here, but we certainly wouldn't get involved in changing the Act or anything like that. That is, we could provide advice, but so far for us, we've been successful in laying that charge with DPP. So I think we'll reassess that pending the outcome of that particular matter.
You mentioned, Commissioner McCartney, that there's a number of investigations that are active at the moment under the legislation. Should we expect that there will be further charges under the legislation?
I think we'll let those investigations take its course, Senator. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Okay. All right, well, I might return to that after we have a result from that pending case before the courts at a later date. I want to turn now to Memorandum of Understanding. You mentioned one, Commissioner, and this seeks to follow up a series of questions asked by Senator Betts at Estimates earlier this year, in particular in relation, sorry, I'll just find the right page, to the Chinese National Supervision Commission. I think there was some confusion about which MOU Senator Betts was seeking to ask questions about. So just for clarity, it's the National Supervision Commission. Just confirming that we do have an active MOU with them?
That's correct.
And what is there an end date to that MOU? Does it expire at any point?
It's due to be reviewed in 2023, Senator.
2023, thank you. It was initiated, as I understand it, in December 2018, which was a different security environment and a different environment in the bilateral relationship between Australia and China. It's moved on somewhat since then. At that time, did the AFP seek the advice of the Department of Foreign Affairs or Trade or others about this particular Chinese counterpart body and how it operates?
Yeah, we always do, Senator.
Is it the AFP's judgment that the National Commission of Supervision is a law enforcement body?
It component of the commission as a I suppose a law enforcement focus.
It certainly has a law enforcement focus, but I'm not sure it is a law enforcement body certainly not in the same way that the AFP is, but not even like some other agencies in China are. I mean, it has a remit which is more to do with Chinese Communist Party members and employees of the Chinese government. and it's not, as I understand it, subject to judicial oversight. For example, it can detain people without charge, and there is no legal avenue. That doesn't sound like a law enforcement body to me. Do you agree?
Listen, I think the place in context is our level of engagement under the MOU. It's been very much focused on proceeds of crime.
Proceeds of crime.
In terms of Chinese economic fugitives that are here in Australia, if this illicit funds come from China into Australia, that in effect is an Australian offence, Senator. So there's an onus and there's an obligation on the AFP to look at those offences. So it's the construct and context that MOU has been focused on sharing intelligence on illicit funds coming into the country.
Has the Commission provided any evidence or intelligence that has led to any convictions in Australia?
No.
Have we provided any intelligence or evidence to them which has led to any convictions in China?
No.
No. So it doesn't sound like it's a particularly active MOU. Would that be fair?
I think I would say one thing, we have made seizures though of assets and cash.
Yep. The reason why I'm interested in this is that in China, corruption is not always what it seems, and certainly enforcement of corruption is not always as it seems. I mean, most analysts would agree that President Xi has effectively used campaigns against corruption to, yes, weed out corruption, but also to weed out political rivals. Is AFP alive to the fact that intelligence or evidence that might be provided by the Commission to Australia could have a dual purpose of singling out people in the Chinese diaspora who are political dissidents, not criminals?
I think it's fair to say we're very clear-eyed in terms of how we engage on these issues. But again, I go back to the point, Senator, if there's illicit funds that are coming into Australia, that enacts Australian legislation in terms of being a criminal offence, and there is an obligation and onus on us to have a look at that.
This is your last question, Senator.
Okay, and I assume, I'll have some more questions to come back to after this then, Chair. I assume that given that we've suspended our extradition treaty with both China and Hong Kong, no person in Australia has been extradited as a result of any cooperation with this agency?
There's never been a person that has been extradited back to China.
Yeah, good, thank you. Just to confirm that. Chair, happy to speak to other senators, but I do have further questions for AFP.
Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks, Chair. Nice to see you all today. Commissioner, has the AFP set up a unit to report on the national security implications of climate activists or targeting climate activists?
Not that I know of, Senator.
Is there AFP resourcing directed towards climate activists?
No.
The variety of state police forces have commenced put in place those units. Have they sought the cooperation of the AFP?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Yep. There were reports in the last 24 hours about a stolen AFP gun being potentially used in two criminal incidents. Are you aware of those reports?
Yes.
First of all, there was an AFP firearm stolen from an unlocked vehicle, I think just before dawn on September the 30th, 2020, is that right?
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, and it was an unlocked vehicle?
I'm not too sure about the unlocked vehicle. I believe it may have been, yes.
And the gun was just lying on the back seat, was it? It was unsecured in the vehicle?
I'd have to come back to you, Senator, on those details. That's pretty specific.
Well,
I'm aware that a gun was
know,
taken from one of our members.
and it was left unsecured in an unlocked vehicle. You must know that, Commissioner. It's been reported multiple times and never denied by the AFP.
Yeah, I'd like to have a look at that. Who's got that?
This has got it.
I'm aware the gun was stolen, Senator.
Yeah, but was
I
it-
just want to be correct 100% correct on this.
It was left unlocked in a car overnight and was stolen just before 6 a.m. on September the 30th, 2020.
Thank you for the question, Senator. What I can say is that it is an ongoing ACT policing investigation, so it would not be appropriate for us to comment any further in relation to the specifics of it.
It's already been stolen, so we know the gun's been stolen, correct?
Yes.
And according to reports from yesterday, there has been no open police investigation, no active AFP investigation of the matter since July, Acting Deputy Commissioner.
Well, Senator, as I indicated to you a moment ago, it's an active ACT policing investigation, so that's not correct.
Well, so is the report wrong when it says that there'd been no active police investigation since July of the matter? It says internal documents reveal no work has been done on the case since July. Are you saying that's wrong?
I think, Senator, we'd like to have a look at that article. Who is that? Who's saying that?
Senator, do you have a copy of that article you can table?
I have a copy I can table. You don't have media monitoring to pick up when the AFP is mentioned in cases like
I
this in
do,
the Herald
but as
Sun.
you know, with the phones, right, it's only every day, and then the story disappears.
No, I don't know that.
Well, I'm telling you,
Okay, that's not
it's
how it
called
works on my
Stream.
phone.
It's a pretty good app.
Yeah, I don't know that. I'd suggest you get another app then. So, Acting Deputy Commissioner,
Yes, Senator.
the report says that no work hasn't been done on the case since July. Are you saying that's wrong?
Senator, I haven't seen the article. All I can
Has
say
work
is-
been done on the case since July then?
I think we need to take that on notice, Senator. Thank you.
Well, the article suggests that not only was you agree the gun was stolen?
Yes.
Stolen from a car?
Allegedly, yes. Stolen, yes.
Stolen from a car?
Yes.
Not allegedly, it was stolen from a
Well,
car.
allegedly, Senator, you know, we'll get into semantics here, but we always have an allegation. We don't have an offender identified.
No, but you must have done an investigation of your own police officer
Of course.
who's left a gun unlocked in an unlocked car. You must have investigated that. It's more than 2 years ago, Commissioner.
That's right.
You don't have an answer as to whether or not you know it was left in an unlocked vehicle overnight, unsecured. 2 years later, you don't have an answer to that.
No,
Is that
I
your
do have an
evidence?
answer, and that is I want to make sure I get everything correct on record, and I want to take that on notice because it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, yes, but I'm sure the investigation would have completed more recently. You don't know whether or
It's not completed,
You don't know
Senator.
whether or not
The
one.
investigation
Senator
is not
Shoebridge,
complete.
Senator Shoebridge, I'm just going to stop you there. If the Commissioner has taken something on notice, it is not up to you to infer that he is not answering the question. You can ask your questions robustly, but you need to do that in a respectful manner.
Has the officer who allegedly left the gun in an unlocked vehicle overnight been the subject of disciplinary action?
Senator, there would be a professional standards investigation that would occur in parallel to the ACT policing investigation in relation to the theft. So yes, there would be a parallel professional standards investigation.
What was the result of that?
I-
Has someone
again,
been held to account?
I think, Senator,
Let me finish. Has someone been held to account for leaving their gun to be stolen in an unlocked police vehicle? Have you held the officer to account?
again, I'd like to take that on notice. Our normal procedure is, yes, that officer would be held to account.
Well,
So I
and-
just need to understand where we're at, whether or not there has been a sanction or not made against that officer.
and you'll provide that on notice, the details of any
Yes.
potential sanction?
Yes.
Are you investigating whether or not the gun has been in circulation in the criminal community since it was stolen? Is that the subject of a live investigation?
Yes, it is. It's a subject of a live ACT policing investigation, Senator.
Was it involved in at least these two these two criminal incidents? One where the first was a standover job involving the gun being held to the head of a drug distributor, and the second was a warning shot being fired in a backyard. Was an AFP police weapon used in those two criminal cases?
Senator, I'd have to take that question on notice and to confirm.
Are you investigating those alleged uses of the AFP stolen weapon?
It certainly caught our attention, Senator. I mean, from that point of view, but again, this is through a newspaper article I haven't seen, I haven't read.
You say it's caught your attention, but you weren't aware of it until I asked you just earlier.
No, of the allegation you just put to us. Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay. So are you investigating it?
Again, I think it's better that we take that one on notice and come back to you.
You're aware of Operation Nambung?
Yes, Senator, we are.
Yep. Can you identify how many AFP assets, including abuse of credit cards, what the loss of assets was, or stolen assets was, associated with Operation Nambung?
Thanks.
Senator, I'd have to come back to take on notice the full amount of assets that were stolen in the course by those members. I don't have the specific details or amount.
It was fridges, microwaves, credit card fraud, all of that from AFP?
Yes.
They basically treated the AFP like their own personal Bing-Lee store, didn't they? Acting Deputy Commissioner? It was like a free access to Bing-Lee paid for by the AFP.
Yeah, I think, Senator, they committed criminal offences, simple.
Yeah, but they literally treated the AFP like a white goods store where you didn't have to pay. You get your microwave, get your fridge, and they didn't pay a cent, did they? And it went on for years. That's what's happened, isn't it, Commissioner?
I think, again, we're happy to provide a more fulsome report to you about that whole matter.
Well, I'm asking now. It's a high-profile fraud and corruption case involving the AFP, and you don't have details about what was stolen. Is that right?
Senator, what I can say is that we treated this matter with the utmost of seriousness and the matter, as you would be aware, not just with these members going before the court, but also this was referred to ACLI for investigation because we treated it so seriously and the criminal offences that were committed by these members.
So for how many years were they treating AFP assets like this?
Well, what I can say to you, Senator, is that investigation was commenced in 2019 in relation to the commission of these particular offences, and it related to the alleged misuse of an AFP vehicle. And following on from that investigation, that was where further investigations revealed the extent of the criminality.
And so my question was, for how long had they been treating public assets like their own sort of unpaid white goods store? How long had they been stealing microwaves, stealing fridges, abusing the credit card for? When did it start?
We don't have that detail in front of us,
You'll
Senator.
provide it on notice?
Yes.
And how much was stolen from credit cards?
Again, we don't have that detail in front of us. I mean, I think, Senator, just so that you're aware, that, and the Deputy's right, that's a joint investigation with ACLI, who have the lead on this particular investigation.
But surely you must know how many AFP assets have been stolen.
Yes, we do.
So I'm asking you.
I don't have it in front of me. So
Senator,
why would I answer that?
Could I ask about the abuse, well, the misuse? I'll start again. Could I ask about Australian Defence Force assets? Now, apparently, the vehicle, maybe it was the vehicle you were referring to, Acting Deputy Commissioner, at least one of them that they used for their own personal use was a four-wheel drive Pajero worth more than $50,000 funded by the ADF. Is that right?
Look, I'd need to come back to you, Senator, if it was an ADF vehicle under the auspices
ADF
of...
funded?
That could be correct.
So how many police vehicles did they just use for their own purposes?
Again, Senator, I think we need to take that on notice. You right into detail here. We do not have that detail in front of us. And if you need that detail, we will give that to you.
Well, if you would, and how much of Australian Defence Force funded assets, which Australian Defence Force funded assets were used and what was their value?
Take that on notice.
Senator, we are about to go to the break, just to let you know.
Who has been prosecuted for this?
Well, the matter's before the court.
Yeah, how many prosecutions are there before
So-
the court?
Again, I'll come back to you on notice.
Well,
Because of the fact, Senator, we have ACLI as the lead, and we do not want to traverse across they're the lead investigation on this, as per the fact that it was deemed a corruption issue under Category 4 of the arrangements that we have.
telling us how many AFP employees have been charged with offences in relation to this is not going to in any way prejudice ACLI's investigation.
Sure.
So I'm asking you, how many AFP employees have been charged in relation to in relation to Operation Nambo?
Senator, I can answer that question. I can tell you that between the 1st of July 2021 to 30 June 2022, there were 3 AFP appointees charged with offences. From the 1st of July 2022 to 30 September 2022, there were 2 AFP appointees charged with offences.
What were their ranks at the time that either they left or were charged?
I'd have to take that one on notice.
And has any other officers been disciplined in relation to this, apart from those 5 who were charged?
One officer was dismissed under Section 40K of the AFP Act. 5 officers resigned during the course of the investigation.
Are they in addition to the 5 who have been charged?
I'd have to confirm that, Senator.
Right, and you'll
Thank
do that
you,
on notice?
Senator.
Yes.
We are
Yep.
going to the break. The committee will suspend for morning tea until 10:45 a.m, where we'll return to the AFP. Thank you, senators and officials. The committee hearing will resume. Just before we begin, we're now continuing questioning with AFP. The program agreed to by the committee and based on requests from senators means that we are now eating into time of other agencies that were requested by senators. I have some advice that there are no questions for the Australian Financial Security Authority. So we thank those officials for attending. We won't be requiring questions of you today. But there are still 4 different agencies to get through, and I just remind the senators that the 2 agencies that we are attempting to get to before the adjournment at 1 o'clock are the Royal Commissions, and I know that there are senators who are keenly interested in asking questions in those sections. So although the questions today are very important, I just encourage senators to be as brief as possible. We'll try to get through everyone in some shorter blocks of time. Senator Patterson, you have the call to begin with.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of that, I will be as efficient as possible. I just have 2 follow-up questions on my previous bracket of questions, then a couple of other quick topics. Just following up on that, our discussion about the Chinese police presence, alleged police presence in Sydney. If it were there and it were operational without the agreement of the Australian government, that would be utterly unacceptable and unlawful, wouldn't it? And Australians could have confidence that the AFP and its partners would take action to ensure that was not the case, wouldn't they? Thank you. One further question on the MOU matter. I think, Commissioner McCartney, if I remember correctly, you said that in February, it expires in February next year?
It's due to be reviewed in 2023. I haven't got the exact date, but 2023 is for review. So
I might have misheard. I thought you said February, but in any case, it's due to be reviewed next year. Has the AFP formed a view yet on whether it should be extended?
I think that view, no, but obviously that view will take into consideration and consultation with agencies such as DFAT and the Attorney General's Department. I think you've noted, Senator, the change from 2018.
Yeah, indeed, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we are operating in a significantly different security environment and we have a very different bilateral relationship from only 5 years ago. Will it be ultimately a decision for the AFP or will it be a decision for government as to whether we should proceed on that?
Well, it's an MOU that's signed by the AFP, but obviously we'll have close consultation with departments in government and take those issues under consideration. But as you say, it's a different environment now.
Thank you. And I just encourage, in your consideration of that issue, to very carefully consider whether or not the Supervision Commission is actually a law enforcement agency and whether or not it operates according to the principles that we would expect from our partners. Moving on to a report in the Canberra Times on the 12th of October, which was about an alleged assault at the Floriade Festival. I'll just briefly recap the report. It was a Falun Gong practitioner who had anti-Chinese Communist Party slogans on her car, and she alleges that she found two young men wearing black T-shirts painting over the slogans on her car, and she was then assaulted in the process of that, she alleges. It says here that ACT Police is investigating. I just want to confirm that this matter is still with ACT Police?
Yeah, we're aware of the matter, but Senator, it's a matter for ACT Policing.
It appears on the face of it, based on the disclosure by Ms Dong to the media, that there is a possible foreign interference angle here. She asserts that it was because of the anti-Chinese Communist Party slogans on her car that she was assaulted, and that it was vandalised. And in her view, the people who assaulted her were professional in certainly the way in which they dealt with her. Is the AFP considering whether there's a foreign interference angle which needs to be investigated?
Senator, what I will say is the Counter Foreign Interference Command is aware of the issue, but it's a matter that's been led by ACT Policing at this stage.
Okay. And if the ACT Police determine that charges can or should be laid, will the AFP then consider any foreign interference matters after that?
If we were considering, Senator, and I'm not going to go into the detail of the case, that we would run parallel to the ACT Policing investigation as we do on a range of other matters.
Okay. All right. I look forward to some progress on that. Turning now to the Medibank investigation. Just give me a moment to find my questions. On what date did the AFP launch its investigation into the Medibank cyber attack?
On 20th of October.
The 20th of October. The Medibank cyber attack was first publicly announced on the 13th of October, and that was the time in which government was first notified as well. Why didn't the AFP's investigation begin on the 13th of October?
There's been ongoing engagement with Medibank by the AFP and also by the ACSC in relation to this incident, but and it was obviously a set of fluid facts and circumstances in relation to the matter. Obviously, in terms of that engagement, Medibank formed the view on the 20th to formally refer it to the AFP for criminal investigation, but there had been ongoing engagement before that date.
But you don't require a referral from Medibank to commence an investigation, do you? You can commence your own investigation if you believe the facts.
We don't require a referral, but I think it's fair to say it's helpful. In terms of engagement and support from obviously from Medibank in this circumstance, but other companies in other circumstances.
Is the reason why that AFP didn't commence its investigation on October the 13th because Medibank stated that they didn't believe any customer data was lost, and so therefore the AFP didn't determine it was a serious investigation?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Senator, it was very fluid, fluid set of circumstances in relation to what actually happened in relation to that matter. But again, Medibank made that decision on the 20th, and we very much supported it.
I wonder, though, given that given the sensitive nature of the data that Medibank held, any cyber attack on it always had the potential to be very serious. Wouldn't it be safer to assume when there is a cyber attack on a health insurer or a bank or any other major utility or telecommunications company that it is serious rather than assume that it's not serious and wait until we find out later?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Senator, we work, as you know, aware, very closely with the Australian Centre for Cybersecurity and brilliantly led by Director General Rachel Noble, and we've worked very closely with them on both the Optus and Medibank matters. And as you know, again, intelligence and information is not necessarily evidence in regards to criminality, and we do rely on companies to officially report it as a crime, and then we take a statement, as you're aware, and that often sets off a criminal investigation, but it doesn't mean prior to that we're not looking at the matter, assessing that intelligence And that's what we've been able to do, I think, very well with the ACSC and the team over there. And we're jointly located because, as you're aware, they own Report Cyber. But in this matter, I think it's important too, Senator, that we've set up Operation Guardian out of our Joint Policing Cybercrime Centre in Sydney, and that's to protect any of the victims as far as if there's any identity fraud or other offences against those individuals who have had their data compromised. And so far that's worked very well in the sense that we went out and actually charged a particular offender who was trying to use some of that data for their own personal gain.
Yeah, I think that was in relation to the Optus attack, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and that appears to be, on face value, someone attempting to piggyback off an attack.
Correct.
Yeah. Just on Medibank though, like it does seem that there was a week has elapsed between the attack being first disclosed and the investigation commencing. I mean, that is lost time. That in a cyber attack, time is of the essence.
I think to probably be fair to Medibank, it's to work it out from a technical point of view. These things are incredibly challenging from a technical point of view because, it can be quite difficult to work out what's been taken, if anything, where has it gone to, and so on. So I think they were very careful in understanding what's occurred. It's not like you sort of, as you would know, Senator, a lot like your traditional sort of warehouse that gets broken into and you know that a tractor's missing or something like that. It can take a while for companies to work out where we know possibly there's been a break-in. We're just trying to understand what's occurred. So that's often why there is a delay in these matters. But what I can say is, having spoken with the CEO, very, very cooperative and have listened to our advice on various matters, not that they have to, and that includes the board as well.
Yeah. When did the AFP first learn that a compromised credential was a possible or likely vector for the attack?
Senator, I haven't got the exact date and time, but again, I think the point the Commissioner's making and I've made is the 20th of October was the formal referral. There's been, in the previous 2 weeks or up to 2 weeks.
I'm just a bit limited for time. I don't like to interrupt, but I apologise.
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. If you could, that'd be great. My understanding is that the company announced that first publicly on the morning of Monday the 17th, so 3 days before the investigation was launched, and I'm assuming notified government before then, or at least around then. It should have been clearer, as I understand it, once we knew that a compromised credential was involved and once we knew what data that credential had access to, that this was likely to be much more serious than the company believed, and yet it was still a number of days before the AFP commenced its investigation. Why wasn't it commenced straight as soon as we learned that information?
I think it goes back to what I previously answered, Senator, plus also, as you're aware, there's no mandatory reporting as well.
That's why I asked when this was reported, because although it's not mandatory, if you had the information...
And we're aware of Australian companies who have been breached, who've made payments through US law firms that have not reported it as a crime.
Yeah. Senator, I'm going to cut you off in a second. I know these are important questions to you, but we have to move on to other senators.
Okay, just finally on cyber, the AFP, and you addressed in your opening statement, in the longer opening statement that you tabled, Commissioner Kershaw, has cooperated with the FBI in relation, I believe, to the Optus attack. Are you also cooperating with the FBI in relation to Medibank, or is it just Optus?
Yes.
And what assistance is the FBI providing in both instances?
I can't go into the specifics in the investigation, but obviously having those strong linkage that we have with the Bureau, and we do go back a long way with the Bureau, is a positive in the sense of tracking down those people responsible, and that's what they're assisting us with.
So it's capabilities that they have that are useful, or is it useful because of the jurisdiction that they operate from and the different laws they had? What's the reason?
It's both capability and also intelligence base. These individuals and/or syndicates operate, as you know, globally, and we're not just talking to the Bureau. There are other police forces in the Five Eyes group. In particular, as chair of the Five Eyes Law Enforcement Group, we've sent that out to our partners, which is New Zealand, as you know, UK authorities and the Canadians. So we're going to unite the fight on this, in particular on ransomware.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Scar. You've got the call.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask some questions specifically in relation to the budget. to determine whether or not there's been any cut to the AFP budget in the last budget, or whether or not there's another way to interpret the budget resourcing statement. So, as I understand it, the March budget resourcing, so in the March budget resourcing statement for the AFP provided for total net resourcing for the AFP 2021 to 22 of 1.930393 billion, and then the 2022 to 23 estimate was 2,010,121. You following me?
Thank you, Senator. So the AFP, like other agencies in the Commonwealth, did have savings allocated to it from the government's plan for a better future. That savings figure was 18.46 million in this financial year.
Sorry,
46 million, sorry.
So there was a cut of $18.46 million to the AFP's budget. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is
Savings measure, apologies.
So, well, sorry, there was a reduction in the AFP's budget from the last budget to this budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There was a reduction.
Yep.
So, a synonym for a reduction is a cut, isn't it?
Savings measure.
There was a savings measure. Okay, well, your savings measure is my cut, so but that's okay. I understand the position you're in. Can I ask? So, $18.46 million. I call it a cut. Commissioner, what does that mean for your activities? Obviously, you've got to find a way in which you can potentially do more work now with less money. So what does that mean for you practically?
Yeah, I think we're always focusing on value for money to our community, and so we're always looking at different ways of how we can deliver that savings initiative and be responsible, and if we require additional funding, there is no doubt that we would go to government for that. So we use innovation, different ways of partnering up with different agencies, and try and use our resources, and we always do anyway, effectively and efficiently.
As part of the budget process, does that cut reflect what you actually asked for the AFP in terms of its budget, or was the budget process less than what you asked for?
Well, I mean, any commissioner would always ask for more, of course, but
so you asked for more?
No, we did not. That's important that I make that comment.
Okay. I'm trying to help you here.
We're very happy with our budget, and that's all I wanted to say about that.
Albeit that there's a reduction, call it a saving measure or a cut. You recognise that?
Yes.
Savings initiative.
Yes.
Okay, that's the term of the day. There were some measures in the coalition budget introduced in the March budget, namely $7.8 million for strengthening Australia's arrangements for managing terrorist offenders and countering violent extremism. Are those initiatives continuing?
Yeah, so that's correct, Senator. So the funding that we received in the March budget for the terrorist offender scheme, as well as the transnational serious organised crime, were continued in this budget. In relation to the high-risk terrorism offenders funding, which was from the budget before that one, we had always had only 1 year's funding for that particular measure, and we'll be going forward in this next budget to seek ongoing funding.
Okay, so but for those two programs, the Strengthening Australia's Arrangements for Managing Terrorist Offenders and Countering Violent Extremism, and the $45.9 million, which is allocated to the Transnational Serious and Organised Crime package in the March budget, both of those packages are continuing.
That is correct.
That expenditure continues across the forward estimates. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, Commissioner, where are you finding those savings of $18.46 million?
So I can help if you like.
I think through the Chief Operating Officer.
Okay.
That's right. We've got sticky fingers. So Senator, the savings figure was one that we only had confirmation of the precise number a few weeks before budget. So we're currently going through the process of where we will allocate those savings. The AFP always has a mid-year budget review that we undertake around this time of year, and so we will look to find those savings at this time. We will, of course, focus on the 3 areas that the government particularly identified, which was travel, contractors and legal. Of course, there are some difficulties for us as an operational agency in relation to operational travel, but that's where we will commence looking for savings, and then we'll look to other areas as well.
And I guess, Deputy Commissioner, in terms of legal costs, there's the ongoing legal issues with respect to assessing control orders for those who've been repatriated from Syria. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to another subject very quickly, and that is the progress, if any, with respect to the introduction of what's referred to as the presumptive legislation for all AFP employees, under which, as I understand it, the plan was to require the relevant insurer to make interim provisional payments for AFP employees diagnosed with PTSD or another psychological condition if the insurer seeks to challenge that the injury is work-related. So obviously that's of key importance. If someone has suffered psychological harm, that they get a presumption that it's occurred in the course of their job, which seems to me extraordinarily reasonable, and that presumption occurs whilst any challenge by the insurer is undertaken, which seems to me an important reform to assist the employees of the AFP. And Commissioner, I know how concerned you and your senior management team are with the welfare of your officers. Could you provide an update with respect to that initiative?
Just before I hand over to the Chief Operating Officer, Senator, thanks for your question. The AFP has a comprehensive system of looking after the health and wellbeing of our members, and in particular, we're very proud of our Shield program that has expanded out across Australia, and it's a bit of a first initiative. We've seen some other states now come to us and ask us how we've done that, and that program is embedding our psychs, PT instructors, dietitians and so on within our various operating environments and co-location. And as you know, police in particular often struggle to come forward with some of these issues. And on top of that, we have our reservist program, which is to enable our officers and members to still remain connected to the AFP if they wish to, and provide back those skills. You know, I met an officer the other day who'd been retired for 4 or 5 years, 35 years experience, and now he's reconnected to us and adding in some great resources and knowledge that we often miss with that experience. And on top of that, we are looking at different ways of how do we intervene in a positive way to get people to talk to each other, look after each other, and also what programs we provide besides the reserve program, which is getting oversubscribed. We also have former members that we connect with regularly as well, and that's important of that continuum, but then I'll hand over to the Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, Senator. So the AFP does believe that presumptive legislation could have significant benefit for our members. We've been working on a proposal to put that forward. We were contacted by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, who are pursuing some potential changes around presumptive legislation, and we're feeding into that process.
Any timeline?
Not.
Can you take that on notice?
I'll take that one on notice.
And Commissioner, just taking on board your comments, which I know you've got a passion in this area, in particular with respect to the mental health of officers working in high-risk environments. So, and I can't imagine what it's like to work in the child exploitation space, but also those who are working undercover perhaps, and they've been deeply embedded undercover for some period of time, and then they come out from those undercover operations. And again, I can try and imagine what that's like in terms of their own well-being and their concerns about the security of themselves and their family. Are there any guidelines that have been developed with respect to how you manage or provide support to individual officers who've been or staff who've been in that situation to guide how they're treated, so that there's also some conformity in terms of expectations as to if I go through this process, if I undertake this task, I have a reasonable expectation in accordance with these guidelines, I should be treated A, B, C, whatever the guidelines were to say?
Certainly, there is. However, I would say that
Sorry, there are national guidelines?
There are guidelines on how we deal with those sorts of matters, but what I would say is that we need to improve in this area, in particular with our undercover and covert operatives. And having just recently spoken to an individual who has been in our program, it was highlighted to me some of the parts of that system. I would call it our system, not necessarily our guidelines, but our system that needs improvement. So, and I have actually spoken to the Chief Operating Officer about this, and we're all in agreement that we need to actually be a bit more customer focused with some of our ways that we treat each individual case. And
is that customer focused or employee focused?
Oh, employee focused, sorry, but I guess that kind of mindset where we're actually a bit more not just saying here's the product, but hey, how can we help you in a more fulsome way?
Can I ask you? We haven't.
One last question.
Yeah,
I know this is really important.
I'll just ask the Commissioner to take it on
finish.
notice. If I can ask you to take on notice to provide what the current system/guidelines
Yes.
are
Yep.
in that particular space, dealing with assisting staff with mental health issues where they're operating in high-risk environments, including undercover child exploitation areas, and also what the AFP proposes to do from here on, what plans you have from here on in order to perhaps refine those guidelines, refine and improve those systems to take into account the points which you raised, Commissioner.
Thanks, Senator. We'll take that on notice and we'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I just have a couple of questions. I'm sure my friend would expect me to ask these questions just to clarify some of those budget questions. What is the total resourcing for the AFP in the 2022-23 financial year?
Thank you. The total resourcing for the AFP is $1.842.8 million. So almost $1.9 billion. Sorry.
And how does that compare with the 2021-2022 financial year funding?
So in terms of actual resources spent, as opposed to appropriation, it's $100 million more than last financial year.
It's $100 million more than last financial year. Okay, and that equates to two new measures. Am I right? There's two new measures in the budget this year.
So we did have a number of measures. If you would like, I'm happy to go through those, Senator.
There's a new measure that relates to the Solomon Islands, which is a substantial amount of that new funding. Can you just explain what that's for?
Yeah, so we did have a measure for the Pacific Security and Engagement Initiative. It has a number of components to it. Part of the bulk of the funding was to continue the existing Solomon's International Assistance Force contingent of around 25 ASL to help maintain law and order and support the Solomon Islands to prepare and host for the Pacific Games. We also had some additional funding to increase support to the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. That included establishing a multi-purpose use of force training centre for public order management training, establishing a mobile protection unit, accelerating stage 2 rearmament, increasing public order management, and some operational vehicles as well.
Okay, and can I ask, in terms of the savings that have been identified, will any frontline activities be impacted by those savings?
As I said earlier, Senator, we are still going through our process for how the savings will be allocated, but absolutely our focus will be on preserving our front line and looking to other areas to find those savings.
And you said that the areas where the savings would be targeted, external labour was one of those.
Yep.
On notice, would you mind providing to the committee the amount of external labour that you've spent over the last 3 financial years?
Happy to do that on notice.
Thank you, appreciate that. Senator Van, I think you have questions.
Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, was AFP involved in the operation and bringing back the women and children from Syria?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. What countries did you transit through from Syria to
Yeah, I think
Australia?
I don't think that's on the public record, nor would we want it to be.
No.
How we deploy.
Okay. I will put some other questions on notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks very much, Chair. Commissioner, do you keep a record of the civil claims made against the AFP?
Sorry, yes, we would, but I don't have that information before me.
And does that include claims made by former officers as well as potentially current officers, as well as claims made by the public?
It would do so, Senator.
And are you able to break it down? Do you keep the data on I assume you keep the data on a year-by-year basis?
Yeah, I believe so, Senator. I'm hoping I might get a message on that, but happy to take the details on notice.
Well, why don't I just ask a couple of questions, and if you get some data, then great. Otherwise, if you take it on notice, I perfectly understand. How many civil claims were made against the AFP in each of the last 5 years? And of those, how many were as a result of officer misconduct as distinct from workers' compensation or civil claims being made against the AFP? And also, is there a process of monitoring those results so as you have system improvements? And in that regard, I'm particularly thinking if there's particular officers who repeatedly appear in civil claims, have you got a process of monitoring that to check that you're having positive feedback with the organisation?
Yeah, so very happy to take on notice the 5 years data, but certainly we do monitor ongoing incidents with particular members to ensure that they're incorporated into future processes.
Yeah, if you could give some detail about how that happens, that would be very useful.
Very happy to do that on notice.
Could I just ask about police numbers? The data that I have shows that in, I think, 2014-15, there were 5,509 AFP sworn officers. I think it's sworn officers.
No, that wouldn't be sworn.
That would
Senator.
be...
That's a mixture of both.
Okay. AFP staff, both sworn and...
Unsworn or professional staff.
Why don't we just say AFP staff?
So can I
Yes.
confirm what year that was? Sorry, Senator?
2014-15,
Yep.
5,509 was the staffing profile in 2014-15.
So for total headcount, as opposed to FTE, I had total headcount at 30 June 2015 as 6,751.
6,751, all right. And then in 2015-16, I think this was going off annual reports, my data, but
It
you
might
may
be
have better
FTE
data.
versus headcount.
Yeah, that could, because I've got headcount in front of me rather than FTE, which would...
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, my 2014-15 was FTE of 5,509, and you have headcount numbers, Ms. Tressler, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Maybe I'll just read these on the record and then see if you can correct or take it on notice and see if it's right or not. 2015-16, 6,475. 16-17, 6,288. 17-18, 6,300. 18-19, 6,439. 19-20, 6,503. 20-21, 6,562. 21-22, 7,066. And then 22-23, 7,472. So I'm not going to ask you to respond to each of that now, but is the 7,472 full-time equivalent the right number for 22-23?
So from an ASL perspective, we've got 7,472 funded positions.
Yep.
Our current FTE at the end of September is 7,104.
Okay. And do you have a strategy in place to recruit it over the next 12 months, I assume?
Yeah, I think, not too sure if it's a record year, but it's pretty close to a record year of 454 recruits will go through in the next 12 months.
So my reading of that, assuming those numbers are right, is that there's been a 35% increase in staff numbers in the last less than a decade. Would that be about right?
We certainly have increased in overall numbers, particularly over the last couple of years, yep.
Yeah, but it's been an environment where we've had trending down crime rates. globally, trending down crime rates.
Oh, not federal
locally.
crime, Senator. So if you look at our legislation and our responsibilities and the growth of federal crime, we're actually the opposite to the state environment currently.
Well, are you saying there's been a 35% increase in federal-related crimes in the last
Well,
decade?
it's also tasks, because if you look at things like being deployed to the Northern Territory, different missions that we've been given. So it's not just responding to crime. The AFP has, as you know, peacekeeping, capacity building in the region, a whole range of different requirements perhaps to traditional state policing.
And is it your evidence there's been a 35% growth, at least, in those tasks over the last decade?
That'd be hard to quantify, but what I would say is that, yes, we've been given more tasks, there's more legislation, so probably combined with the two. As you know, traditionally, normally, when legislation is passed, there's a component of policing numbers that are increased as a result of that legislation, because that's an additional to what the police force is required to do. And so we have seen a growth in legislation over that period, as well as in our tasks from government.
Senator Shoebridge, I'm going to give you a wind up shortly.
Okay, cool. This is my last subject matter.
Of course.
Commissioner, the AFP does an annual staff survey report, is that right? The only one that I can find on the public record, or the most recent one I can find on the public record, is October 2020, done by NAUS. I note that there was reporting, first of all, is there a later document on the public record?
We haven't actually published our staff survey results. We have actually just completed another staff survey that closed last week, and we're currently waiting for the analysis to have the most up-to-date staff survey information. But we did do a staff survey as well 12 months ago.
Yeah, and you didn't publish that?
No.
Why not?
I don't
I think the intent is, if I'm correct here, the next one, which is now, we will publish that one. I think that the last one is an interim. It's not a full survey. Is that correct?
It was a new. We used updated methodology for the previous survey, and this is the second year of using the new methodology.
So why didn't you publish the, I think it was ORIMA, O-R-I-M-A research? Why didn't you publish that from last year?
I don't think there's obviously any specific reason. We can get a copy of it for you.
Can you provide a copy?
Sure.
And you will publish the current one, is that right?
Yeah, we would look to publish a report from the latest staff survey.
Yeah. Well, you see, because the only one that's on the public record is the October 2021, and I think you'd agree, Commissioner, it makes some disturbing reading, would you?
I think having had experience, previous police force staff surveys are useful data, and it's how people feel often during that week or on that day. It can be on that day. I think what we can be proud of, Senator, is that the AFP has the highest rate of return. Traditionally, police forces are about 30%, 35%, and I'll be happy to be corrected on that.
Just in the limited time we have,
but I think, Senator, it's important that you understand our data set is quite accurate. We normally get between 60 and 70% of our workforce actually respond, which is useful data for us. I think for us, yes, there were some concerning things within the survey, but we've been addressing those over time, and it's useful data for us to understand how the workforce is feeling.
Senator Shoebridge, this is your last question.
Well, have you got a copy of the survey there? I think a copy of the survey was provided to you.
Me. Yes, but in black and white, unfortunately.
Well, it still works. On page 10, you'll see that there's particularly for those officers band 1 to 8, the overwhelm, some 3,770 officers responded to whether or not the senior executive makes well-informed decisions, and only 34% said yes, 36% said no, and 30% were neutral. And then obviously, the higher up the pay scale you go, the more confidence there is in senior executive decisions. But that is not a vote of confidence in the senior executive, is it?
I think we use that as a way to say that we needed to actually communicate the decisions and why. And I'll give you an example, Senator, because it is important. We're currently undergoing a restructure in the organisation, looking at an additional deputy position. We're actually going to take 4 months to do that and consult with the membership and our members, across the board. And I think that's important that we've learnt from the feedback that what staff are essentially saying is they want more consultation before critical decisions are made that might affect their area or them individually. And we're also working with the Australian Federal Police Association on this as well to make sure there's no surprises. And that's important, I think, that we do take on board and then we take action as a result of these survey results.
Well,
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. No, I'm so sorry that you do not have the call.
Well, if I have one more question, I won't have to come back.
Well, you don't
to
have the call anymore, Senator Shoebridge. Senator Rennick, you have the call.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hi, guys. My question is again regarding the size of the crowd in February that came to Canberra on February the 12th. That area was measured out at 60,000 square metres. You've previously said that the crowd size was about 10,000 people, which works out at about one person per every 6 square metres, which is about 2 metres by 2 metres. I was there and can tell you that was not the case. Can I get access to the software that actually where you calculated that? I think last time you said you used software or you used some method. I'd like to see the methodology you used to calculate the size of that crowd, if that's all right, please.
I think what we can do is come back to you as to how we made that assessment.
Yep, sure,
Yes.
I'd appreciate that. And can I also get access to any correspondence that you had with other government agencies about the size of that crowd?
Sure.
Yep. And in regards to the, there was a search that was conducted on a public servant a number of years ago in regards to the Leppington Triangle. Could I also get the correspondence between the Australian Federal Police and the Auditor General as to what evidence they gave you to justify that search in their private residence, please?
We can do that.
Is that right? And I'd also just like to raise the issue of the RBA's management of Australia's gold in London. Australia owns 80 tonnes of gold that's held with the Bank of England. The RBA has disclosed that 80 tonnes was refined in 2015 and onwards. They were never informed by the Bank of England until after that event had occurred. I'm just curious to know is what the AFP's view is on the fact that the RBA weren't even aware that 80 tonnes of gold, which has a market value of $6 billion, isn't being properly managed by an independent statutory authority.
I'll take that on notice, Senator, noting I don't know if we have any remit on that, but we'll come back to you.
Yeah, just given that it's, it belongs to the people and it's $6 billion, I would have thought that, some sort of larceny could be involved here if the Bank of England's melting down our gold without our permission, the RBA's permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Patterson, you have the call, noting we are going to be moving to AUSTRAC very shortly.
Understood. Thank you, Chair. I'll be as efficient as I can. Final matter. Commissioner, you've previously spoken about, at estimates and other places, the increasing threats to Member of Parliament and their staff and family, and unfortunately we've seen incidents around the world which confirm the seriousness of that threat. I wonder if you have any updated assessment on that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we are concerned. I mean, we're seeing that around the globe, that threat to high office holders, and I've spoken to a number of my colleagues around this, that unfortunately it seems to be on the increase, and often it's through that online environment that those threats are made. I think also we're working with ASIO and with others about our assessments and how we come to those assessments. What is important is that part of the restructure that I mentioned previously is we're actually looking at, within our Protective Security Command, coalescing our Counter-Terrorism Command and Special Investigations or Sensitive Investigations, which will bring a whole new doctrine to that command, given the fact that our counter-terrorism people are used to dealing with threat constantly. So for us, it makes sense to have that lined up, given the fact that we are seeing a sort of increase in, we are seeing an increase in the number of threats. So the number of high office holders, we're also we're doing a review of how we do those assessments, given the fact that they're a point in time, and so what can happen in a week can change pretty quickly. And as you probably appreciate, we have to move very quickly and also be more focused on what the needs are of the individual. As you know, some MPs are more comfortable than others, and not that changes our decision, but I think for us, we're more and more going to be required to protect our high office holders.
Perhaps on notice, given the time, could you just provide any kind of empirical data that tracks the threats to high office holders, as you put it? And just quickly, have there been any recent enforcement actions that you have taken or with partners against threats to members of Parliament or their staff or families?
There has been, and it's ongoing. I mean, even during the election, I think we had a record number of incidents as well, and we're happy to supply that data as well, Senator.
Thank you. And then just finally, do you also track cyber threats to members of Parliament and their officers? By that I don't mean threats of violence online, I mean attempted hacks or of MPs, those sort of things. Are you tracking that?
Well, yes. However, as you know, it's a huge environment to track, but yes, we do look at those matters.
And do you provide advice to members of Parliament and their staff about how they can protect themselves online?
We have, and we continually do that. We've had various forums up here. Also have a brochure which I think everyone's been given, a letter, how to contact us. And I do encourage that, Senator, that if senators and MPs are concerned, they should contact us through various means. And you can do that confidentially as well, of course, and we take it seriously.
Thank you. And just on notice, any empirical measurement you have of those cyber threats to MPs as well?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And can I also say thank you for the work that you do in that space, not only to support senators and MPs. You always the dealings that I've personally had have always been impeccable, but particularly the support that you give to our electorate staff, who I think actually bear the brunt of most of the assessing the threat in the first instance, and they are very well supported by you and your team, and I want to thank you for that. Senator Shoebridge, you have another question, but can I just say you are taking time from your own colleague who is sitting there waiting for AUSTRAC, so that is for you to decide.
I appreciate the constant forbearance of Senator Rice.
Will you have a second?
Thank you. Commissioner, could I take you to page 18 of that survey? You still have it? You'll see that 3,984 staff responded to the question when asked if they believe the AFP has a culture of cronyism or nepotism. Of the 3,984 staff who responded, a remarkable 78% said yes. That must have rocked you when you saw that.
Where do you get 78% from? Oh, okay.
In the top right-hand corner.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes, got it now. Yes,
That
of course. And I think that's why, as you know, I started in October of 2019. And since then, I think we would like to probably give you our next survey results, because I think we'll see an improvement there. That's part of, I think, being more transparent in our decision making, and also the view that, you know, people are getting promoted based on friendships and a whole range of things. So it was concerning to me, and it is something that we've been actively working on.
Perhaps you can give on notice what changes were made to professional standards and what changes were made particularly to the promotion arrangements once you saw that, I would say, disturbing response from your own staff.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. There being no further questions for the Australian Federal Police, I thank you for your ample time this morning, and I call officers from the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. quick, actually, especially seeing as
Thank you, and thank you, Ms Rose. Ms Rose, we've asked you to table your opening statement. I've had an opportunity to do that.
Yes.
Fantastic. Are you happy for us to go straight to questions?
Without reading the statement?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Senator Rice, you have the call.
Great. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ms Rose. And I've just quickly scanned through your opening statement, and I did want to ask about what you could tell me about your action against Crown Casino in Melbourne. I note from your opening statement that these matters remain before the court, and as such I'll not be making any further comments. But could you just outline, just for the record, as to what is currently going on with your action against Crown?
Okay, there's a lot going on in that sector, Senator, and thank you for reading the statement and understanding. At the moment, we've lodged civil penalty action against Crown. We're at the moment in the middle of mediation before we go back for a case management hearing later this month. I understand that it's been rescheduled too. So I can't talk about how that mediation is going, but we're certainly progressing it and we hope to have it wrapped up sooner rather than later.
Right. And talking broadly rather than specifically with Crown, what are the range of actions that you could end up taking against a casino, through actions like this?
So there's a range of regulatory enforcement options we have, whether it be appointing an auditor to have a look at an entity, which we've just done with Sportsbet 365. Sportsbet and Bet365. We can look at a range of other smaller types of enforcement penalties. Civil penalty, of course, for us is the most serious. It does take the longest amount of time because it is so serious, and obviously there needs to be a case that's ready to go before the court, so that will unfortunately take a couple of years. But with the size of our fines and the impact that it has on the entity, I think that's completely understandable that it needs to be a very robust process before we go before the court.
Right, and so with that, and that civil penalty is fines, or do you have the option of, or is that could that civil penalty include, a recommendation to close them down completely?
We wouldn't recommend that we close them down completely. That's not within our legislation, and our legislation under the civil penalty provisions actually looks at not having an oppressive outcome on an entity so that it would have to close. That's part of the penalty provisions that the judge will take into account. But it does, of course, need to be have specific and general deterrence, so it has to be significant enough that it actually has that deterrence impact. But a civil penalty, yes, will involve fines.
So is there anything that a casino could do that would result in a recommendation, to be closed down?
Yes, certainly. It wouldn't be in our remit. It would be with the state and territory gambling regulators. We don't regulate gambling, we just regulate the compliance with the AML-CTF Act. And anything that's criminal, we would pass on to the AFP or state and territory police for them to investigate criminal activity. There's also the ability for ASIC to look at directors' duties in casinos.
Okay, so you do that investigation. You can have civil penalties, but anything beyond that you then have to hand over.
Correct.
Right. I'm just reading an article about the situation with Crown and with Star that was published in the ABC a couple of weeks ago, which, and I seem to agree, there appears to be nothing casinos could do that would see them lose their lucrative licence to operate even for a single hour, which certainly I'd say would be the general view, given what has been, the behaviour that has been found at Crown and the reason for your investigations. It's extraordinary. They seem to be in this completely special world of their own that, in fact this article says that other industries like banks working under the eyes of a bevy of regulators must look at casinos and wonder how they get away with it. How do you respond to that sort of, what is the general community sentiment that despite all of the findings against Crown, that there's still the likelihood is they're still going to keep operating.
So different states and territories have responded in different ways. They've strengthened their regulators. Some of the states and territories have got special managers that are overseeing their remediation. So they're all different because they're all managed separately. We're really pleased to see that there's been a real uplift in activity in states and territories looking at this area in general.
Your approach to regulations, reading on your website, notes that you take a risk-based approach to compliance with respect to money laundering and counter-terrorism funding.
Yes.
Can you talk us through what that means in situations like Crown, where they have been found to be in breach of a whole range of things? What does that risk-based approach look like?
Okay, so we've got over 17,000 entities that we regulate. Clearly, we can't, be aware of everything that those entities are doing. So we look using the international standards and our own law enforcement knowledge and our own financial intelligence unit intelligence. We look at what the highest risks are. So banks are a very high risk, which is why we looked at them early on. The majority of money and transactions within Australia goes through our big banks, so we see them as the high risk. Then you've got other areas that are high risk for a different range of reasons. You've got casinos that are a high risk because of the gambling side of things, and they're understood internationally to be a high risk of money laundering. You've got risks in the remittance sectors because there's international transfer of funds. So we've done a lot of work in the remittance sector. We started last year doing a lot of work with pubs and clubs because we were concerned that there would be displacement from the casinos into pubs and clubs. So we've done an uplift of education and guidance in those areas so that they start to be more aware of the money laundering risk and report to us more suspicious matters transactions, which I think there's been a 300% increase since we've done that. So each sector that we look at has a different level of risk, and then we allocate our regulatory and compliance resources and our financial intelligence unit resources accordingly.
So with respect to Crown, where you've got actions, alleging that they've allowed at least 576 breaches of anti-money laundering laws, what does that risk-based approach then look? Are they still, are Crown still expected to be just self-reporting, or which is, I think, what the standard is, isn't it? Or what's happening? What does AUSTRAC do in terms of regulating a company and monitoring it, where it's, you're alleging that it's got massive allegations of anti-money laundering laws?
I can tell my deputy's itching to answer this.
Peter Soros, Deputy CEO, Regulation, Education and Policy. So, Senator, in a matter like Crown, we have been doing quite extensive work across our whole organisation for several years and working with law enforcement partners and regulatory partners. And so that's why our compliance work did lead to those intensive and extensive enforcement investigations and did lead to us filing civil penalty proceedings, and that's why we're in the middle of that court case at the moment based on that intensive work. At the same time, our intelligence function was working with law enforcement partners in and around casinos, investigating criminals who would seek to exploit those channels. And so we have done intensive work. And in parallel with us now being in court with them, in going through that mediation process that Ms Rose described, we're also intensively monitoring their remediation work and their uplift to monitor how they're improving their detection and risk management for money laundering.
Tell me, for somebody that
Senator
doesn't know
Rice,
what...
this will be your last question.
Sure.
What AUSTRAC monitoring looks like.
Yeah, monitoring a business like this can... it can involve us going and doing on-site assessments where we interview key officers. It can involve us looking at key documents. It can involve us seeking material from the company, including board papers, a whole range of documents. We can seek their independent reviews and assurance reports where third-party consultants have come in and been asked to look at their programs, and we can also, seek any number of documents and materials
so
that
are
ask that
they-
and probe to make sure that their investments are
Thanks,
working.
Senator
Are these the
Rice.
issues
Thank
that
you,
you're
Senator
taking
Rice.
with Crown? Can I just follow up with that
Well,
final question, please?
Very happy for
Chair?
you to put questions on notice. I do need to hand the call over to other senators. Senator O'Neill may cover off that question for you anyway, Senator Rice.
Senator O'Neill would like to re-ask the question.
It's a topic
Trying to keep us on time.
a topic of keen interest, but Senator O'Neill, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Chair. So can I just clarify further from Senator Rice's questions? Can you actually outline the action that you've taken against Crown? Just clearly, what is the action?
So we've
Mr.
filed,
Soros.
yeah, we've filed civil penalty proceedings against Crown, which is, as Ms Rose mentioned, the most serious of all enforcement actions that we have in our toolkit. In previous examples, that's the action that we took against Westpac and CBA, which resulted in those significant fines. So the Crown case is at that midpoint where we issued the court with a range of statements which we allege Crown has failed to, and breaches where we're saying Crown has failed.
Yep.
And we're now going through that court case process.
So just to be clear for the record, what is it that you allege Crown has done?
So we allege, and I'll just give you the brief, what's been
Thank
put out
you.
there publicly. Allege Crown failed to identify, assess, mitigate and manage its money laundering and terrorism financing risks. In particular, Crown failed to have a compliant AML CTF program, which is required by Section 81 of the Act, and did not appropriately monitor its customers, required by Section 36 of the Act.
Thank you. That makes it very clear.
Yeah.
Could you give me an indication of when you commenced this investigation?
March 20... the investigation?
Yes.
We started the investigation in 2019.
Yeah.
The exact date we could get on notice
we
for
can give
you.
you more detail on that.
And when did you commence your enforcement action?
The civil penalty proceedings were filed in the court. I can just...
Sorry, the compliance assessment was in September 2019 and an enforcement investigation began in August 2020.
And then we filed civil penalty proceedings.
In March, 1st of March 2022.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. With regard to Star, New South Wales authorities have exposed significant issues with that casino as well.
Yep.
Can you outline what action you've taken against Star?
So we currently have an enforcement investigation into Star. We, of course, helped with each of those inquiries and have worked very closely with each of the investigations in the states and territories and the regulators. I can't go into any further detail with exactly what we're alleging against Star. The enforcement investigation is due to come to me with a recommendation in the coming weeks, at which stage I'll be able to make a decision on the enforcement action we're going to be taking, and we will detail at that time what it is we'll be alleging.
So you cannot provide me today with what you allege because you're currently still investigating, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you let me know, when did you commence your investigation?
So it commenced in June 2021, the enforcement investigation, and that was based on earlier work from our compliance teams, which that compliance work began in September 2019, which then led to our enforcement investigation commencing in June 2021.
Okay. Is there anything you can further add to the public record about about Star? Because I know there's incredible interest in both of the casinos.
Yes, which is why we're trying to get to an enforcement outcome as soon as possible. There's also a third casino that we're looking to finalise at the same time, Sky City. And we hope to have a similar announcement at the end of this month or beginning of next month.
So the Crown timeline, when do you think? What's the likelihood of you providing that?
Look, our preference would be to wrap it up this year, but that will depend on whether we can come to an agreement in mediation or whether we need to go back to court.
So there seems to be a bit of a theme here about business practices in this sector.
Yes, there is.
That are concerning. With regard to the cases of Crown and Star, the money laundering that is at risk in these contexts, make me ask the question, do we have the right regulatory settings in place? You know, as a regulator, you get to see what's happening, how effectively the current law and regulation is constructed. What do you think could be done to more adequately address the risks that would ensure compliance with the Act?
I think what's helped us was during the pandemic, it meant that junkets stopped and the junkets haven't recommenced, and that's something we're very pleased about.
You're not endorsing more COVID to stop the junkets?
No, I'm not.
No, so to be clear, I'm asking you about I'm asking you about regulatory settings that could provide the interruption that you've described was a historical artefact of the moment.
A big risk that we've been concerned about.
Yeah.
It's for us, and not unlike the banks, there is the regulation, but there's also the culture that the organisations have and impose, and the expectations that this is something they need to take really seriously. Money laundering is not a victimless crime, and if they want to be good corporate citizens, which is what they're all telling us at the moment, then there has to be serious application of money laundering regulations, of legislation and compliance that they can continue to show us.
So to be clear, you're talking about compliance, but you're not talking about regulatory reform. Do you have...
So regulatory reform we're working on with Attorney Generals, and certainly from the last couple of reviews there's a requirement for simplification, and that's something that we're working on together. The AML-CTF Act is a very complex and long act, as you know, and to make it easier for people to comply and less expensive for entities to comply, we want to simplify the legislation which we're working on at the moment.
Can I just go to the transaction amount of $10,000, which is a trigger point? So the reporting obligations apply to that transaction over 10,000, not under it. Does this open up additional money laundering risk for transactions below this amount?
Yes, it can, and certainly that's that structuring of ensuring that there's amounts transacted just below the 10,000 amount is something that we look at and have algorithms that have a look at that, and certainly that's something the banks look at. There's been an interesting discussion on with inflation, is that something that we should raise the level of, but then...
Do you have a view about that, Ms Rose, given your insights?
I think there's...
Senator, this is the last couple of
I think there's pros
questions.
and cons, but I might ask Dr Moss, who's in charge of intelligence, if there's any comments in the...
We receive about 178 million reports, and most of those are FDs from banks. And what's really interesting with those is that the gold, the nuggets in the reporting is the suspect matter reports. The FD reports are greater volume, are almost the gold dust that you need, tools and analysis to find the gold. Casinos produce a range of suspect matter reports, but AML-CTF is not the only route to gain information around casinos. We work closely with the joint management groups in each state and territory to build pictures and financial intelligence. So we have an operation called Operation Kitten, which complements the casino work from the regulatory side. That produces for law enforcement analysis of high-risk customers, money flows, and gives guidance to law enforcement where to disrupt.
Thank you, Mr Moss. Just one further line of questioning. I'm sure I'll have to put most of these on notice, but there have been recent reports in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald highlighting the significant money laundering risks that Australia faces, and not just with regard to casinos, which have been the subject of discussion so far with you this morning. Could you give me a sense of the overall risk of money laundering in Australia? Why are foreign organised crime syndicates like those reported in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald targeting Australia for money laundering? Are we an attractive place? Beyond organised crime, what other crime types have used money laundering to advance illegal activity? Potentially, are they terrorists? Is there human trafficking rings and child abuse rings? And in the context of all of that, Australia's commitment to the Financial Action Task Force, following the review in 2015, found Australia to be non-compliant. Could you give some remarks about what's happened or not happened with regard to FATF since 2015, when we were found to be wanting?
That's a long question.
I got it as much as I could in one go.
I'll take it in chunks.
Thanks.
But I might come back to you, Senator. So as far as FATF is concerned, there's a range of recommendations they made in 2016. I think there's about 50% of them that are still to be actioned, but primarily the two big ones are beneficial ownership, and Treasury just put something out yesterday looking at consultation to implement a beneficial ownership register, which is fantastic.
Which is the follow the money tool, isn't it? So
correct.
The people can pretend there's something, but when you follow the money...
Absolutely. And that's not just really important to us, but to law enforcement partners, to the ATO, to the banks themselves. That will be fantastic. The other part, of course, is what's called the Tranche 2 entities, the professional facilitators of accountants, lawyers and real estate agents, and we're talking to the government now about options for that and what sort of models could be implemented. And that's important because in 24-25, FATF will come back for their next evaluation of Australia. And we scored quite poorly in 2016 on those issues, and they'll be looking at what we've done in this space. So
it was in 2016 that the former government set up the schedule of what was supposed to happen, wasn't it?
Yes.
That hasn't
You're
happened.
squeezing in some more questions, Senator
Sorry,
O'Neill, and our
really
colleagues will
bold.
get a bit cranky. So if you've finished your answer, or if you have more to add to that answer, please do so, and then I'll hand over the call.
there's loads more to answer for that question, which I'm happy to take on notice, if you'd like, because there are about 5 parts to it.
Really terrorists, human trafficking, child abuse rings.
Yeah, look, Australia does have a challenge of money laundering because of the money made primarily in the drug trade here. Those profits need to be laundered. They need to be cleaned if you're going to use them in the system. Then you've got obviously organised criminals that are using that money for broader enterprises, which will include human trafficking, child exploitation and counter-terrorism financing. That's the other part of our legislation, the AML-CTF Act. And we look at, particularly overseas and in the region, any patterns that we can see for those that are financing terrorism, and we've got legislative responsibility for that. I don't know whether you wanted to add to that.
Financial intel is really good to detect and disrupt child sexual exploitation. I mean, in 2015 there was only just over 1,000 reports from banks around it. In the last financial year, that's over 3,000. So we work closely now with AFP and the Australian Centre to counter child exploitation. And we have a dedicated team to work on child exploitation, but it's not just money laundering, TF, counter-proliferation, it's proceeds of crime across all the crime domains. It's the use of the banks, the casinos, the online payment platforms, cryptocurrencies, and emerging technologies like non-fungible tokens that start to be used for things like trade-based money laundering. It's a whole new generation.
And that's
Thank
before we
you,
get to
Dr.
Trench
Moss.
too.
I
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
that fulsome answer. Senator Scarr, you have the call.
Thank you. I've been very patient, Chair. I'm going to ask you some very directed questions in relation to your 2021-22 annual report.
Yes.
In relation to performance measure 3.3.
Yes.
It says percentage of regulatory work initiated by self-disclosure, which is disclosure by Corporate Australia,
The entities, yes.
as opposed to percentage of work proactively identified by AUSTRAC annually. The target was the percentage of self-disclosure work to fall within 35% and 65% of regulatory work. The result was 17.5%. So that performance measure was an absolute flop. Do you agree with that?
It's an excellent question, because we have very robust conversations about this in the agency. The performance measure is a contested one, because some regulators, many regulators actually, will want an incredibly high self-disclosure percentage, because they believe that it's showing that the deterrence effect means that people self-disclose.
Correct.
So they don't get caught.
And there's a culture, and in addition to that, there's a culture
Yes.
of disclosure.
Yes,
And this
correct.
comes back to some of the questions you've heard earlier today, where your statement of claim with respect to Crown is some 863 pages. I know you can't talk about the case, but perhaps you can confirm the statement of claim is 863 pages, which is quite extraordinary.
Yes.
So, sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to make that point.
No, because it's an excellent question, because we have been arguing about what is the best performance measure. Is that you have increased self-disclosures because people are worried that you're going to catch them and punish them for not doing it themselves? Or does it show that you're doing a lot of proactive work in the risk-based space that's working, and therefore you're uncovering the non-compliance before it's self-disclosed? And we argue both ways.
So, and I can see that in the performance measure, because to be frank, you could sail the Queen Mary between 35% and 65%, but in reality the result was 17.5%,
Yes.
half of your lowest threshold.
Yes.
So
Whereas-
the achievement, the result was a flop, wasn't it?
Well, I think the measurement, I won't use the word flop, I think the measurement...
What would you call it?
...is flawed.
You've said it a lot.
I think the measurement is flawed, and we need to do more work. Mind you, these are all new performance measures in the last 1 or 2 years, because we're trying to get more specific about our performance. I think the measurement is flawed. It's a measurement, but I think it has another story behind. A couple of years ago, we were criticised that we were having too many self-disclosures and we weren't finding any of this information out ourselves. People were coming to us and telling us. So there's a balance there of your investment in compliance work and proactive work where you're discovering this non-compliance, and on the flip side is what's the cultural effect you're having on your entities so that they come to you and disclose.
So let's talk about culture. And I understand your comments with respect to the performance measure. Just closing out that point. What's the performance measure in that space moving forward then for this financial year?
Well, we're still arguing that. We've kept it for the time being, and it will be another whole discussion if we get tranche 2 entities, because we then go to 100,000 entities.
Right.
And that the discovery piece cannot be overestimated there, because we're just not going to have the contact with those entities. It is, if you're talking about culture, as a regulator, you want to. We spend a lot of time educating and guiding so that we build trust and with our regulated population. We want them to come to us with self-disclosures, knowing that we will take a balanced view.
Can I be a bit more brutal?
Yeah,
And
sure.
I'm saying this as a former company secretary
Sure.
and general counsel of an
Sure.
ASX listed company, right? And I've actually been quite astounded by what has been discovered over the last 5 or so years. If you go back to 2017, Tabcorp got hit with a civil penalty of $45 million, correct?
Yes.
So I would have thought that would have been a wake-up call to the whole of corporate Australia.
I agree,
that this
Senator.
this is a very, very important issue. Is that a fair comment?
I think that's
So-
I feel exactly the same way.
So you then CBA got hit with $700 million civil penalty. Westpac got hit with $1.3 billion civil penalty. You got an 863-page statement of claim, which has been lodged with respect to Crown. You've got investigations underway in relation to Sky City, Star Group. You told us in your opening statement that you've appointed external auditors to Sportsbet, Bet365.
And Entain.
Is there an issue with Corporate Australia with respect to this area of regulation? Do they just not get it?
That's an interesting point. Is it the cost of doing business? And I think that's. I think the size of our penalties help us mitigate against that, because they've got to be significant enough that it's not a cost of doing business. I've seen, when I started 5 years ago, I couldn't get anyone to talk about money laundering. It was I think largely, and this is a generalisation, seen as a victimless crime that Corporate Australia didn't have to worry about because it was tax evasion in another form, and it was in another place. The change in understanding in the CEOs of the big agencies that we regulate and the boards, I think, has been significant. It hasn't happened as quickly as I would have liked. I have to say I was surprised about what we've found in the gambling sector and now the online gambling sector.
Because just in relation to that, gambling is a high risk area of activity, going all the way back to when Las Vegas was established by the mob. Gambling has been a high risk area in terms of anti-money laundering, and I would have thought any board of directors worth their salt would have had money laundering issues nearly at the top of their risk register. But notwithstanding that, it's hard to find a gambling entity in Australia which is complying with the law. Does that surprise you?
Yes.
In that context, it seems to me you can issue civil penalty notices. At the end of the day, those penalties, as you know, they ultimately economically flow through to the shareholders.
Yes.
So the shareholders haven't been involved in terms of the management and operations, day-to-day management and operations of the business, are actually bearing the economic outcome of those civil penalties. At what stage are individual officers and directors going to be held personally accountable for these egregious unlawful activity?
That's, as you know, we hold entities to account, not directors. ASIC is working...
And I'm also talking about officers.
Yeah, ASIC is working with us on these matters. But I'll leave that to them to talk about what they're doing there.
Well, just in that point, so you are in close coordination with ASIC in relation to whether or not offences have been committed under the Corporations Act in relation to a number of these cases, is that correct?
At least one, yes.
At least one. Can you mention which case?
No.
But at least one case, you're in close cooperation with ASIC as to whether or not offences have been committed under the Corporations Act.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes, and we're also liaising with law enforcement partners about possible criminal activity.
Okay, and where are those law enforcement? Are they state-based police agencies or
state
AFP?
and federal.
So you're also in liaison with state-based police services and the Australian Federal Police with respect to any potential criminal offences which have been committed in relation to a number of these cases, including with respect to the casinos and gambling
one of
entities?
these cases, and I wouldn't want to say any more at this stage because it's only
with respect to one of those cases.
Yeah, it's only early
So I
days.
guess just to close out this area, the frustration which maybe you sense is there have been so many wake-up calls in terms of this area. You'd have to be in a permanent coma not to understand the importance of it. And it just seems to me, you're talking about mediation with Crown, and I don't want to get into the context of that mediation, but do you recognise at some point in time there has to come to the stage where individuals who are given quite important statutory responsibilities, who bear onerous duties in this respect, who know what the law is, they know their responsibilities, they shouldn't be in their positions if they don't, where those individuals need to be held to account. Do you accept that proposition?
That's not something that AUSTRAC has within our remit, but certainly... Yeah. What I can say to that is I think there's two pieces that offer specific and general deterrence. One is the enormity of the fines.
Which are ultimately paid for by the shareholders who had no involvement in terms of the lack of,
Correct.
of meeting the corporate obligations.
Correct.
They're people who have shares in members of superannuation funds.
Yep.
They've invested in the top 200
Yep.
listed companies.
Yeah, but the other piece is reputation, and I think that has had a significant impact on a number of the big companies. They don't want to have that reputation, and their staff don't want to have that reputation either. Staff want to be proud of the organisation that they're working for, and we've really seen that with the banks. They have turned around that culture, and they are anti-money laundering warriors for us in relation to what they give us financial intelligence.
Well, look,
but it's a long process.
Just in final, can I just congratulate everyone who's been involved in your activities over the last 3 years? That 863-page statement of claim is a work of art. War and Peace, the first edition of War and Peace, was 1,225 pages, so it was 2/3 of the way there. So congratulations to everyone involved in that.
Thank you, Senator.
And with that, I'll have no further questions.
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Appreciate your patience. Senator Shoebridge, you have questions, and then we might be able to get to the Office of Special Investigator.
That is the hope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And look, thank you for the work you do in AUSTRAC. I think you can probably get it.
Thank you for thanking us, because it's a big job. It's a hard job being a regulator.
Yeah, and I think you can probably hear from the contributions from across the political spectrum that we're grateful for the work you do and how important the work you do is. So from behalf of my party, thank you. The UN Office of Drugs and Crime has estimated the value of crime proceeds laundered in Australia at more than $13 billion. Do you have an estimate? Have you looked at that UN estimate?
Yes, we've looked at lots of estimates around the world, and FATF have tried to look at this. It's very difficult to come to an agreed value of how much money is laundered. We tend to use the UN 2 to 5% of GDP figure, and that seems to have the most general agreement as to what it is, but no one's exactly sure.
Well, 5% of what is our GDP, 1.3 trillion or something, is a lot more than 13 billion, isn't it?
It's a lot of money.
So at the top end, we're talking maybe 60 billion, 70 billion. Is that the kind of top end?
We look at what the cost of organised crime is, and I think this...
60.1 from the ACIC.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the cost of organised crime, though, but that's not just... No. It's not the sheer profit they're squeezing out of the system.
Correct, but you know, when you're looking at those sort of figures...
The overall regulatory costs. What direction's that trending, though, in Australia?
I couldn't tell you with any certainty. My gut feel is that it's going up, but I couldn't tell you with any certainty, Senator.
I acknowledge your evidence that some corporations, like banking corporations, some other big players, may take the reputational hit as important and may change their behaviour in that regard. But does that really apply to the casino industry?
I'm not the person to ask, I don't think.
Well, I mean, your answer to Senator Scarr was, well, if they're exposed as having contacts with organised crime and money laundering, then banks take the reputational hit, the staff take the reputational hit, and they change their behaviour, and that's been good. But when it comes to the online gambling and the gambling industry, their business model is so enmeshed with money laundering and so enmeshed with international organised crime that kind of reputational hit doesn't seem to have the same impact.
I don't know. Certainly in early discussions about remediation, they are telling us that is important, and there's been a turnover of staff, and the message is that is very important to them and to their new boards. But
as important as attracting junkets from overseas where they get billions of dollars washed through their gambling tables? Is it as important as that? Shrugs don't turn up well on Hansard. I don't know how to express what you were trying to express.
Yeah, it is an opinion, and we're not a gambling regulator.
Yeah.
where AML-CTF, certainly the state and territory regulators that have beefed up recently would be better placed to answer that. But I would hope that with the type of people that they have on their boards, these big companies, and the involvement with state and territory communities, that it would matter, that it would matter to them.
Yeah, well,
perhaps I'm being naive.
Well, we probably can't fruitfully explore that more at this point. In case after case, there are 3 casinos that you're taking remedial action in relation to: Crown,
Star and Sky City.
Star and Sky. It's interesting their names, Crown, Star and Sky. But anyhow, there are those 3 entities. Crown.
Virtues.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. Crown, Star and Sky. In each case, I'm assuming your investigations have raised very disturbing activities.
Yes.
Yeah. And that wouldn't be the first time very disturbing activities have been identified, at least in relation to Star and Crown.
No, we're certainly seeing that in the inquiries.
Yeah, and a series of state-based inquiries have identified deeply disturbing activities from both of those institutions. And in fact, there probably wouldn't be a casino that's been operating for more than a couple of years that hasn't had significant concerns raised about their activities in Australia. Would you agree?
Yes.
So it must be frustrating for you.
Yes.
You identify it, you expose it, you report on it, but then the state-based regulators keep extending the licence, maybe whack a condition on it. But it seems harder to lose a casino licence than an apartment block in Australia. That must be frustrating to you.
The ongoing discovery of poor AML practices is absolutely frustrating. And for all the reasons that have been discussed before, I would have thought certainly after the first, but most certainly after the second large action, boards around the country would have sat up and taken notice. But there's 2 parts of that. We are really pleased with what states and territories have done since holding their own inquiries, and how closely they're working with us, the attention that they're paying to this now, and how seriously they're taking it. So I think that's been a really good development. The second part is, and this is the challenge sometimes between the 2 parts of our organisation. Gambling is legal in Australia. We get good intelligence, financial intelligence from those entities, and what I would like to see, that if they continue operating, they do so with very robust AML-CTF systems, but they become, like the banks have become, very good partners in the provision of financial intelligence to fight against crime.
Is Crown, Star or Sky City, would you describe any one of those 3 as very good partners?
They're certainly showing signs that they can be, yes.
Given how reticent state licensing authorities are, well, given the failure of state licensing authorities to cancel a licence, is it time for there to be a federal test and an overarching federal test, integrity test for casino licences? Would that assist?
That's a policy question.
Fair point. Can I ask you about Tranche 2?
Yep.
I think that was first, Senator O'Neill reminded me, I thought it was 2017, but Senator O'Neill reminds me it was 2016 when the regs were put in place and Tranche 2 was just about to happen. It's now 2022. Do you have any understanding about why we haven't got to Tranche 2 from your perspective?
Certainly there were a range of concerns about the regulatory impost that Tranche 2 would put on small businesses, but we're currently having discussions on whether the department wants to speak further to this about possible constructs and options of what that could look like. if we were to regulate them.
From your perspective, is the real estate industry an industry of concern that should be that
we
would
know-
benefit from the rolling out of Tranche 2 sooner rather than later?
We know from our own intelligence, but law enforcement in particular, that lawyers, accountants and real estate agents are both involved wittingly, and there was a real estate agent in Queensland that was charged with money laundering last week or the week before, and also used unwittingly too, because they're not conscious of what to look for. So yes, of course, particularly the financial intelligence side, we are concerned.
Given the time, could you perhaps on notice identify any enhanced risks that have been identified since 2016 in relation to those three professions?
Sure.
And finally, the New South Wales Crime Commission recently recommended mandatory cashless gaming cards and enhanced data collection to prevent money being laundered through pokies in New South Wales pubs and clubs. Is that something AUSTRAC is working on? Do you have a view about that?
No, we worked closely with the Crime Commission on that paper, which was a really good piece of work. That's a policy question. New South Wales, I know, is having conversations about it. But again, from a financial intelligence point of view, anything that links a person to the money that they're using would be of benefit to us.
So that would, could you say it would be of unambiguous benefit in terms of tracking finances?
For financial intelligence, yes.
And limiting money laundering. Do we agree?
I think it's a logical assumption.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Senators. Given that there's no further questions for AUSTRAC, I want to thank you for your work and for your appearance today. I'm going to call officials from the Office of the Special Investigator. Oh, we would continue to ask you questions all day if we could, but everyone has taken in mind that we have some other agencies to get to, and senators do have questions for both royal commissions. Just David, just so there are questions for the Veterans Royal Commission, and my office, we are trying to contact Jordan's office to let him know. Yeah. That is coming up. One. Adjourn at 1. Yeah. 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 So, thank you. Okay. Right. Well, thank you, Director General. We've requested you to, if you could table your opening statement. Have you had an opportunity to do that?
I think you just received it. Chris
you.
Moretus, Director General of the Office of the Special Investigator. I think, Senator, at the request of the Secretariat, we've done that. Happy
Thank
to do that.
you, Director General. Are you happy for us to proceed to
Please.
questions on that basis?
Yes.
Senator Shoebridge, I think you have questions to kick us off with.
I'm just in the middle of getting some other documents. Do you mind? Is there another?
There are no other questions.
There are.
No.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure they will come. Director General, thanks very much for your attendance today. And if you just give me 2 seconds, I will just read your opening statement.
I'm happy to read it. That's all right.
Can you first of all describe if there's been any difficulty occasioned by the recent machinery of government changes and the movement to the Attorney General's portfolio? Has that been seamless?
Nothing, no problems at all.
Yep. And there were 36 matters raised for criminal investigation by your office.
Incidents, yes.
Sorry?
Incidents, yes. In Brereton, yes.
Incidents. Are all 36 of those matters still under investigation?
Yes, Senator, as well as other matters that have come to our attention beyond Brereton.
Yeah, well, we might come to that in a second. In terms of the 36 matters, so all of them are still under active investigation.
Yes.
How many people are the subject of that investigation, of those 36 incidents?
It's quite complicated. I think the Brereton report had about 23 people, but I'd have to double-check talk to my investigators about that. It's quite complex over a long period of time, but that's the sort of ballpark figure I'd go with.
Have any matters been referred yet by your office to the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions?
We have been in close consultation with the DPP for a while, but I won't go into the details of where we're at on finalising briefs of evidence, if any.
Well, my question is whether or not any completed briefs of evidence
Completed briefs
have
of
been
evidence,
provided
I can say at this stage, completed brief of evidence, no.
All right. Can you indicate how many partial briefs of evidence have been provided to the ODPP?
I prefer not to.
Why is that? Sorry, Director General.
They're still in the process of investigation, finalising elements. We'd rather not put that public at the moment.
All right. Do you have any indication of when the first brief is likely to be, first completed brief is likely to be provided?
If I can be optimistic, I'd say in the near future. If I was pessimistic, I'd say not the near future, but I'm trying to be optimistic.
And when you say near future, do you consider 2022 to be the near future? And 2023 to be beyond
probably
that?
Closer to 2023 than 22.
Closer to 2023?
Sure, it's 6
You mean
weeks.
during 2023?
Yes, during 2023,
Okay.
yes.
And the first half of 2023?
I'd hope so if I'm optimistic.
You indicated in February that your investigations are primarily focused on gathering evidence outside Afghanistan for the Brereton inquiry. Is that still the situation?
Yes, Senator. There's been no change in the situation in Afghanistan, and therefore that precludes our organisation from engaging in any way with anybody or any evidence located in that country.
Have you sought the cooperation of humanitarian groups or international organisations such as UN agencies? Have you sought their cooperation so as to allow you to operate within Afghanistan?
We have pursued options of engaging with international organisations. It'd be fair to say that many of them are tentatively returning. I know one of them, UNAMA, is looking at that, but the arrangements for how they return, how they operate are different. Having said that, we also, be fair to say, engage with those sort of non-government bodies that exist to obtain evidence that might be useful to us. Well, and they've been cooperative.
Well, the UN Special Rapporteur for Afghanistan has visited Afghanistan multiple times in the last few years.
Yes.
And that has been to actively investigate ongoing human rights violations. If the UN Special Rapporteur can visit, I suppose the question is, why can't the OSI?
Well, that's a very...
I'm interested in your
that question. Senator, it's quite easy to fly in to fly out. I've been to Afghanistan myself in the past, in a previous role. I understand what's involved. I understand what the situation is. I deal with countries that try to have a presence there, or they have fly-in, fly-out arrangements. I understand the organisations setting up a presence there. It's one thing to go there and to have a conversation with a few people in Kabul. It's another matter to go out into, let's say, a province, obtain evidence, and then have a state-to-state relationship whereby you can use that evidence in an Australian court of law.
Yep.
That's the main problem. I can give you examples. We know journalists can do that, but I'm not a journalist, and my investigators aren't journalists. We can't just pop up in Kabul for a day or two, obtain some statements and come back. We need to work with the de facto or de jure state with which we can engage. That's the nature of state-to-state cooperation, and I'd love to have investigators go there.
Well, the UN Special Rapporteur also needs a UN-to-state relationship
not exactly
of
the
sorts.
same, Senator. It's not exactly the same.
Are you close to getting some form of state-to-state relationship which would enable you to do that?
Well, you'd have to defer to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on that question. They're the ones that are engaging with the state, the regime in Kabul.
What have they advised you about the likelihood of getting that kind of relationship in place?
It varies. There was a level of optimism, perhaps, or slight optimism early on. I'd say at this stage there's been no positive trend to suggest that we should be preparing for any such visit based on that sort of arrangement.
In the absence of getting on the ground in Afghanistan, will you be able to complete your work?
Well, if that means, will completion mean being able to thoroughly obtain all evidence that may exist in Australia, overseas and in Afghanistan? Obviously not, unless situation changes in Afghanistan. If the question alludes to whether we can achieve our objectives of preparing briefs of evidence that the DPP will accept to prosecute, we are quietly confident.
Quietly confident?
Yeah, would rather be loudly, don't want to be loudly confident.
No, confident was all I was happy with confident.
I'll avoid the adverbs.
Provided you don't limit
Most
confident,
things quietly.
I'm happy with confident. In the March estimates hearing, you noted there were complex challenges which included the inability of your office to gain access to materials for the purposes of the Brereton report, as well as not being able to view the Brereton report in its entirety. Has there been any update on that?
Yes. As you'll see from my statement and many statements at estimates, including on our website, about the nature of the Brereton report and what it means for our work. We have a team of lawyers that are separated from us in the Australian Government Solicitor that are engaging and going through that material and transferring material to us that they believe, without us second-guessing them, because if we did, we'd be exposing ourselves to evidence that could be, let's use the term, tainted in quotation marks. That's progressing, but it's a long, drawn-out process because the nature of the problem is not just knowing X or Y, it's knowing what emanates from X or Y and what is the thread of evidence that's been created through the Brereton inquiry. So it's a case of unscrambling a few things. It's quite complex. So there is progress, but it's slow. Right. But there is stuff transferring to our people.
Is that team of AGS, it's the AGS you said?
Yes.
Do you think it's been adequately resourced to do the job at hand?
I think so. That's not been the issue as far as we're concerned. I think it's more the complexity. I can say that when we commenced this, in fact, before we even commenced, when I was Secretary of the Department involved in preparations of this, I engaged one AGS senior lawyer to do this, and they had a second officer. They now got 14 staff. Oh. That's a pretty good arrangement.
You indicated earlier that as a result of the investigation you've been doing, you're not limited to the 36 matters that were referenced in the Brereton report. How many additional matters or incidents, however you wish to describe them, are the subject of your current investigation?
Obviously more than Brereton, so it's in the 40s. And that varies. There's a whole range of possible scenarios, and to be fair, I don't want to be held to that figure because as we investigate, you have lucky days sometimes.
Well, yeah, and the number may go up or the number may go down.
Correct. And, to be fair, as we develop an understanding of all the evidence that's possibly available to us that ever will be, there'll be moments when we'll have to consider whether there's no further action to be taken because of the absence of or insufficient evidence for the DPP. And that's the nature of what law enforcement does all the time, I understand.
No, I fully understand that the nature of your investigative purpose is not to have a concluded mind at the beginning, but rather follow the evidence and be guided by where the evidence takes you.
Yes.
And so the number may change over time. But currently there are the 36 matters in the Brereton report that are still live, and then there's an additional number of matters which takes the overall number to something in the 40s. Yeah. I
should also mention for clarity that there are investigations that were launched before our creation, which are in the remit of the AFP. Very small number, but that continues for the moment.
Okay. All right. Do you know how many that is?
A couple.
And is that now jointly been done by you, or are those matters?
No, because of the stage at which they were at, they were remained with the AFP, and I understand that continues to be the case, but we obviously consult with them.
In terms of I'm sorry to try and drill down on the number, but I think the number is important.
Why is the number important, Senator?
To get a sense of the kind
It's
of
a lot.
resourcing that's required, to get a sense of timeliness of the investigation,
Yes.
and to get a sense of the task in front of you, to be
Yes.
quite frank.
Yes.
So there's the 36 in the Brereton. Can you give a clearer indication other than in the 40s of the
Yep.
additional number?
It's under 50
It's under 50.
at this stage.
All right. So is it
So in that context, if you go into the question of resourcing, we have the option to have more investigators appointed. We don't think we do. We have about 57 investigators and analysts and specialists working for us, plus another 37 or 38 specialists in the AFP who are dedicated to our work. My Director of Investigations is comfortable with that arrangement, and they're pursuing all those cases as best they can and advancing them as quickly as we can.
Well, I suppose I'm interested in resourcing because the original average staffing level budgeted for the office was 190. And what is the current ASL?
It's I think the budget figure is about 158. We're about 128 headcount at the moment. We have the option, as I said, of another 25 or so investigators. We don't think we need that at the moment. In fact, we're quite happy with what we've got. I should also mention that those figures don't include obviously the special counsel team, who I mentioned, the team in AGS. We call it the special counsel team because that's the term we use. It's about 14 or so. We have corporate arrangements with, well, it was with the Home Affairs Department, but with the MOG we provide resourcing for the Attorney Generals to give us corporate support, so we don't have to worry about that stuff in any way. And then there's other agencies that work with us. So I think with our headcount of 128, we're doing, I'm very comfortable with the resourcing. That has not been the problem for us. And I think I've said that consistently. It's the complexity of the situation, legally, operationally, which is really the issue.
I note and accept your ongoing difficulties about gaining access to Afghanistan, but to the extent that witnesses who were in Afghanistan are now in other third countries, I think Pakistan or the like, have you been in contact with those witnesses in those third countries?
We seek evidence where we can, so I won't go into who we've spoken to in which countries.
Senator Shoebridge, I'm just
I don't want to get into operational details.
That's fine. I'm not trying to interrupt the questioning. I just going to let the senator know that his colleague has questions for the next witness and is here. So if you want to ask your last couple of questions.
Have your office's investigators travelled to any third countries apart from Afghanistan in order for
They haven't travelled to Afghanistan.
No, except you've said they have not travelled to Afghanistan.
Yes.
Have they travelled to countries outside of Australia except for Afghanistan for the purposes of contact with witnesses and investigations?
Going into details, the answer is yes.
What is your office's approach to undertaking some kind of public outreach to make information about your investigations accessible to communities in and from Afghanistan so that more potential witnesses will come forward?
The way when we first set up, we set up a website as a source of people knowing about our existence. And the reason for that was, and I need to explain this, is because we needed to make sure that anything that came to us was managed appropriately for a variety of reasons, and we've done that. In the meantime, we in the AFP funded the translation in Dari and Pashto of the Executive Summary of Brereton. Our new website, now that we've moved to AG's, actually has drop-down language translation, albeit Google, but I've had a look at it, and it's not that I can read Pashto, but I can read other languages, and it's not bad for AI-generated translations, I must say. So they have Pashto and they have Persian, but it's not Dari, I know, but we've also engaged with community leaders. We were getting into that phase of talking to people in Australia, then Then we had the COVID situation, and then we had of course, the evacuation from Kabul last year. And to be fair, the community for the last 7 or 8 or 10 months has been focused on that issue, and we've been not engaging as much, but we've certainly tried to make it clear to anybody who has evidence to provide it to us.
So I don't know if I fully followed your evidence about translations. There's a translation available in Pashto?
Early last year, the AFP and we funded the translation of the executive summary, which is publicly available, of the Brereton inquiry into Pashto and Dari, and that's available, I think. And then, since then, our website has the facility to use a drop-down translation mechanism, and people can read about our work in at least Pashtun and Persian,
Senator,
which is
Pashto and Dari.
Senator, we do
not
have
Dari, but Persian technically. Although my understanding of Dari and Persian is that they're related languages.
I have one final question.
Of course, we have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Can I ask you about your annual report?
Yes.
The 2022-23 corporate plan stated that the annual report will be handed down in October 2022. Did I miss it? Is it about to be handed down?
It's been handed down a while ago.
Okay.
As far as I know, last week or two, there's annual report.
Copy over there for you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate
It's
that.
riveting reading, Senator.
Well, I'm sure it is.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge, and thank you, Director General. I now call officers from the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with a Disability. We'll go straight to Senator Steele-John, who has questions. And then we are seeking to get to the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Affairs before 1 o'clock. Just for Senators' benefit, there is a committee that is holding hearings in this room after our hearing finishes, so we will be finishing at 1 o'clock to allow that to happen. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be quick in these questions. Can you tell us what percentage of the budgets, what percentage of the Commission's budget remains currently to be spent?
Paul Cronin, Official Secretary, Disability Royal Commission. Thank you, Senator. Where we are with the current financial year is we have a budget allocation of $81.589 million. To the end of September, we had spent $19.742 million, and that leaves us with just over $79 million left for this financial year.
79 million, thank you. Now, hard copy submissions must be postmarked no later than the 31st of December 2022, and phone submissions close on the 23rd of December. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there a contingency plan or flexibility in place around that deadline?
Senator, not at this stage. No, there is not. As I think you'd be aware, we went to the Australian public in February of this year with advice that our private sessions registrations would close on 30 June this year and that our submissions would close at the end of this year. We have on a number of occasions gone out again to the Australian public and through our disability representative organisations, advocacy groups, social media and our website, reminding those who may be interested in submitting a submission that they're the closing dates. The reason for that is that we simply need to collate or be in a position to be able to collate and analyse that information in preparation for our final report.
So what will happen to submissions received after the 31st of December?
My understanding is that they'll be retained by the Royal Commission and for the purposes of the Archives Act will be kept and we will make sure that they're transmitted to the Attorney General's department who hold the records of the Commission once we disestablish next year.
And okay, but they won't be included in the final report?
I don't believe the contents will. I might just pass to Ms Crawshaw, who knows the details. Certainly the actual numbers we may end up including, but I don't believe the content will be.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Sally Crawshaw, Assistant Secretary of the Engagement Branch. That's correct, Senator. So the information received after the 31st of December won't be included in the final report.
Okay. What's the average number of written submissions that you're currently taking a week?
The average number is around 80 at the moment per week.
So you're receiving 80 per week. What's the average number of non-written submissions you're receiving in a week?
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood the question.
No, it's a follow-up question. So that's good. That's written submissions?
That's
and
written
then-
submissions. No, so that's overall,
Oh,
total
overall,
submissions,
okay.
yes. I don't have the breakdown of that information per week on me, but I can certainly take that on notice for you.
Thank you. That'd be great. What's currently the size of your waiting list for being able to actually give evidence to the commission, make a submission to the commission?
I assume, Senator, that you mean for private sessions, the wait list for people
Yes,
that are waiting
sorry,
to have
yes.
a private session? Yeah, absolutely. So the wait list at the moment, as of today, is 446 people that are currently waiting.
So there's 446 people on the waiting list. And we have 6.5 weeks to go until the contents of those private sessions won't be further included in the report. So how many are you getting through a week currently?
Private sessions?
Yes.
At the moment, the average is about 19 per week.
So you're doing 19 per week. You have, how many was it again?
446.
446.
That's
so
correct.
do you believe that you are going to get through that number? You'd need 23, at that rate, you would need 23 weeks to clear that backlog.
That's correct. We won't get through them all this year, Senator. We will have to hold some private sessions into 2023. And we have been in touch with everyone that is currently waiting, so all of those 446 people, to let them know that that is the case and to encourage them to make a submission with us by the 31st of December if they would like their information included in the final report. What we have said is that they are still able to have a private session next year as well as make a submission so that they can have their information included and also meet with the Commissioner if that's their preference.
So just to clarify, all 447 people will be able to give evidence at that private hearing or make a submission, and that evidence will be included in the final report.
If they would like to make a submission, yes, that option is available to them.
Okay. In terms of evidence given under the new privacy amendments that we passed in the Parliament relatively recently, how many of those submissions have been received since that legislation passed?
Do you mean people that have opted to have their submission
Listed as confidential?
As confidential?
Yes.
It's 56% of overall submissions at the moment.
From that period of time?
From that period of time, yes.
56% overall. Will all submissions made, so just to be clear, all submissions made before the 31st of December will be included in the final report?
That's correct.
Okay. So then from that point on, what will your work consist of for the next 9 months, and how much do you expect your funding will be expended? Like, how much will that cost you in that next 5 months? 9 months, sorry.
Senator, are you talking about specifically the work of the engagement team, which is what Ms.
Yeah,
Crawshaw was after?
so what I'm saying is, post the December 31st deadline, you've still got 9 months to go. What will that work consist of in that 9-month period, and what is your what's the cost of doing that work?
Senator, during the 9 months of 2023, we already have one public hearing programmed for February of next year. Our commissioners are currently looking at a public hearing program for the rest of 2023 and to what degree we will hold public hearings next year. We'll also, as Ms Crawshaw mentioned, continue to hold private sessions till we get through everyone who wants a private session. And Ms Crawshaw also is putting in place an engagement strategy with members of the public, in particular advocacy groups and those others who have engaged with us over the course of the last 3.5 years, to, I guess, bring them up to date on where we are with the Commission's work, just to close the loop with all those people that have taken the time to engage with us in terms of where we are.
So
Now,
just to confirm, sorry to cut you off and just aware of time, just to confirm, there may well be public hearings next year?
Yes, at the moment we have a public hearing programmed for, I think, the week of 13th February next year, and there may be further public hearings next year. That's still under consideration.
Okay. Now, of all of the submissions that you've so far received, what percentage of the overall submissions have been from disabled people?
Senator, it is 46%.
46%?
46%, yes.
Of disabled. And the rest, non-disabled people or didn't identify?
A combination. So we don't actually ask for demographic data from people who make a submission to us. So it's never an absolute number, but of people that do identify, it's 46%.
It's 46%.
That's correct.
Do you have any information as to what percentage have been provided in a language other than English?
I do have that for you. It's quite a small number. It's only 0.01%.
0.01%?
In a language other than English, yes.
Did the Commission have a target for what it hoped to achieve in that area?
We did not have a target for what we hope to achieve in that area, but that doesn't include Auslan, of which we have 53 submissions.
53?
53 submissions that we've received in Auslan.
Okay.
Senator, sorry for interrupting, but we've also received submissions in art form, musical submissions, and a range of submissions to the Commission. We've also had a very extensive called engagement program throughout the life of the Royal Commission, where we have physically spent time with core communities with a view to having them make submissions to us and sitting with them and also taking submissions from them as well.
Last question, because I know I'm cutting into Senator Scarr's time. Of the submissions that you've taken to this point, what's the gender breakdown?
Half female, Senator, and about 30% are male, and the rest we don't have the data for.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
you,
Chair.
Senator Steele-John, and thank you very much for your time today, officers. There being no further questions, I call officers from the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Tracy Bell, Acting Official Secretary,
Thank
Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide.
Sorry for cutting you off, Ms Bell. We're a little short on time, but thank you very much. We've asked if any opening statements could be tabled. Have you had an opportunity to do that if you had one?
I have no opening statement.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms Bell. Senator Scarr, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair, and Ms Bell. First, congratulations to everyone involved in the Royal Commission. It's an extraordinarily important area of work. We only have a limited period of time, which doesn't reflect the importance of the work, but
No.
please know that we all recognise the importance of the work of the Commission and really do appreciate what everyone's doing to contribute to some of the most important work that's currently being undertaken in this country.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to ask some questions, and I have to be careful the way I do this, given our Secretary has given me advice that there's a bill called the Parliamentary Private Members Bill, which is before this committee for consideration. So I have to be careful I don't traverse into the area of an inquiry into that bill, but I think I can do it in such a way that that doesn't, because my questions go to the operation of the Commission, but I will be glancing repeatedly at our Secretary to see if she raises an eyebrow and brings me back on track. But I refer to recommendation 7 from the interim report, which was that the work of the Commission has been impacted by the operation of the Parliamentary Privileges Act 1987. And of course, the Parliamentary Privileges Act puts in statutory form the concept of parliamentary privilege as per the Bill of Rights, 1688, in particular that the proceedings of Parliament, which is given a broad ambit to include committees, etc., cannot be impeached or questioned by any court or commission or tribunal, just setting it up for people who are following this question. So I note the Royal Commission's recommendation. I just want to quote to you a paragraph out of Odger's Australian Senate practice, and then ask if this is the approach which is being followed by the Commission in practice, given the issue which has arisen with respect to the intersection of your work and parliamentary privilege. So I'll read this to you. It's from Odger's Australian Senate practice, 4th supplement to the 14th edition, updates to 30 June 2022. It's on page 5, and it reads, page 68, at the end of paragraph 2, add. And I'm going to read this sentence to you, and it's talking about the Royal Commission into misconduct in banking, superannuation and financial services industry. Quote, while the Royal Commission had access to the information published by the committee, and it's referring to a parliamentary committee, parliamentary privilege limits its use so that while people could not be directly questioned on their parliamentary evidence, the Commission could use the material to develop its own lines of inquiry, end quote. So the distinction is drawn there between actually asking questions of potential witnesses with respect to evidence they've given to a parliamentary committee or in the process of discharging a parliamentary role, as opposed to pursuing lines of inquiry which have been identified from that sort of parliamentary process. So my question is whether or not the Royal Commission, notwithstanding its concerns as enunciated in Recommendation 7, is still pursuing lines of inquiry within the meaning as countenanced by Odgers in that paragraph in relation to subject areas which were mentioned in the course of parliamentary proceedings. Do you understand the point I'm making?
I do. So, Senator, as we outlined in the interim report, our difficulty is there are a number of reports that have been presented to Parliament under various means, including Attorney General's reports, etc. And we're not able, because of parliamentary privilege, to be able to use those in evidence. We can recreate the evidence from those reports, but that is a very inefficient method and use of taxpayers' funds.
So you do recognise it would be open to you to use the material included in that report to develop your, and to quote Odgers, your own lines of inquiry, end quote. That's recognised. My question is an attempt being made to do that?
We are looking at workarounds, but it is a very difficult situation when the material is there, some of it in the public domain. So it is very difficult for us to do these workarounds, takes a lot of extra time. Ideally, we would be able to use those reports as part of our evidence base and allow people the opportunity to also obviously cross-examine. But because of the Parliamentary Privilege Act, we're not able to. And there's at least 3 key reports that we're looking at the moment. And as we indicated in our interim report, other Royal Commissions have found this also problematic and have asked for it to be looked at.
Well, they have, and I don't want to go, I'm just focused on the operation of, so you're currently looking at workarounds to address this issue?
We're trying to, but we don't know if they will be successful yet.
Okay, that's really all I
Well,
wanted.
I might just ask a follow-up to
Sure,
that,
Chair.
just to get this clear. It's a topic, I guess, of a concern to senators because we're obviously very protective of parliamentary privilege, but also very supportive of the work that the Royal Commission is doing. And so seeking a way to facilitate that, I think, is of keen interest to a lot of senators. There has been a letter sent from the presiding officers, the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, dated the 10th of August and the 11th of August respectively, to the Commissioner. And I just want to direct you to what the presiding officers have said in that letter. They go through a number of points, but essentially get to the crux of the issue, which is that there's been a suggestion that the Act should be amended. I won't go into the legislation, but so that relevant material can be able to be used, provided it's not used for drawing adverse inferences about Parliament Houses, committees, members' work, or to impugn any person's testimony or submission to the Parliament or committee, or any person in respect to providing such testimony or submission. This is the last line of that letter. It says, "Our advice is that the law of parliamentary privilege, as it currently stands, would already seem to permit the Commission to use published parliamentary material, provided it was not used in those ways." So the letter details what is already permitted under parliamentary privilege, and I'm just wondering whether the Commission's position has changed since receiving that letter in August.
No, Senator, it hasn't. And about the same time we responded to presiding officer's letters, we were also asked to present a submission for the inquiry, which we've done, which is also now available on the website. And in there we go through why it is difficult for us for some of the things we're
so you
looking
haven't taken any comfort from a letter from the presiding officers of the Senate or the House of Representatives on who are seeking advice from, can I say, I have a lot of respect for both of them. I don't think they drafted the letter personally. I think they sought a lot of advice from the experts on parliamentary privilege to form this opinion, and there's been no change based on that advice.
Our legal representation still feels that the workarounds with the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with and the reports that we seek to use are not going to give us the evidence base that we require as part of our hearings. And as I said, they're still looking at how we do those workarounds, but it is problematic for us when there are reports available that have quite detailed material in them that would be of benefit to our hearings.
And it's right that of course, sorry, Senator O'Neill, you go ahead.
So, as the Chair of Privileges in the previous Parliament and the Deputy Chair in this Parliament, it's a complex area, and parliamentarians are inducted into understanding what this means. When we take material from whistleblowers who are quite significant in establishing things like royal commissions, we and they need the protection of privilege to do so. That is not widely understood, but it's a critical part of the work that we do, and there's a reason that parliaments have privilege and that there's some separations between that and what the judiciary might want to do, or in this case, a particular form of inquiry called a royal commission. I just want to critique the language of a workaround that you've been using, Ms Bell. The reality is, according to the information that's been provided by the highest officers in the Parliament, the President and the Speaker and their staff, there is no impediment to you accessing and using the work that has already been done by the Parliament to inform your action, and if you find useful material there, for you to go ahead and use that to undertake your own investigations. That is my understanding of how it works. I wouldn't call it a workaround, I would call it preliminary work done in assistance to the inquiry that you're undertaking. It seems that you have a different view to that, Ms Bell.
Not a different view, Senator. It's just a lot of work has obviously gone into those reports that we wish to use, and a lot of the information we would like to present in hearing is in those reports, but we can't use them directly. We have to create our own lines of inquiry, which is correct. Yes. Repeating the work of those reports, which with the complexity of the work we've got and the time frame adds an extra impost, which is why our Council have asked if we can look at ways in which to assist us use that material directly from those reports.
The material is already assisting you, Ms Bell. It is already there. A huge amount of work has already been done by the Parliament to assist you. But to ask parliamentarians to absolve or to remove from themselves privilege would be a fundamental and very significant change to the practice of Parliament. We have parliamentary privilege for a very good reason, because we inquire to all sorts of things in addition to this particular matter with regard to our veterans, which is of paramount importance to all of us.
Senators, thank you, and thank you for your time. If there's no further questions, thank you so much for your time, Ms Bell. That concludes today's proceedings. I thank the Minister and the departmental officers for their attendance, of course Hansard Broadcasting and our wonderful Secretariat staff. We'll just move a motion to accept all
Chair,
table...
can I just say something before
Of course,
before we
Deputy
finish?
Chair.
Can I just congratulate you on your chairing of
thank you.
of this hearing? It's been very cluttered and with lots of content and senators coming and going. So I think you've done a masterful job as chair.
Thank you. Senators are reminded that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by 5 p.m. Friday, the 18th of November 2022. We've moved a motion to accept tabled documents received during the day, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thanks, Chair.